Director in the Academic Quality and Workforce Division here at the Coordinating Board. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here to this first meeting of the Engineering Field of Study Advisory Committee. I'll be serving as key staff to this committee. Before coming to the Coordinating Board, I spent my career in community college education as a faculty member and administrator. I look forward to working with all of you in this good effort as we begin it. Let me get a couple of housekeeping matters out of the way. First of all, I'm going to ask Dr. Gary Tomerlin to speak to the issue of the weather.
I've heard
and can you do anything about the weather, please, Gary?
From what I've heard, apparently we're going to get a little bit of everything possible today, from, as you saw, fog now to thunderstorms this afternoon to rain, sleet, snow, and who knows what else depending on your section of the state. And so what we discussed yesterday is if we need, we can adjourn the meeting early, perhaps 2 o'clock or so. But then I think really the message to all of you is not knowing what's going to happen if you need to change your flight, or if you can change your flight to perhaps get out on the afternoon flight instead of the evening flight. If you have to travel back to El Paso by car, you might want to leave now. It's a large state, and more than anything else is, although we're glad you're here, we want this project to go forward. When we were discussing the weather yesterday, we actually have another committee meeting tomorrow that we actually went ahead and preemptively canceled, and we'll either look very smart or maybe we won't look so smart depending on what the weather does. But we don't want y'all to be in harm's way is what we're saying. And so plan accordingly, and then we can go from there, okay? Thanks, Mindy.
Thank you, Gary.
The release of liability forms.
Coming around shortly.
Coming around.
A couple of other housekeeping matters. I'm going to pass around a sign-in sheet. If you would, please just sign by your name. We are sharing mics. You should have a mic within easy reach. If you speak during this meeting, please don't forget to turn your mic on. And then remember to turn your mic off until you speak again. The bathrooms, for those of you who don't come to the Coordinating Board headquarters here often, are across the hall. You can exit through the back door, or you can slip out through the kitchen. They're in the middle of the hall on the other side. And don't forget, please, or we will all be in trouble with Rhonda Hernandez, who is assisting this. Put your $10 in your lunch envelope, and she will collect it from you if you have not done so already. And I'll proceed. I thank you for your willingness to serve on this new advisory committee that will identify the block of courses which may be transferred to a general teaching academic institution and which must be substituted for that institution's lower division requirements for the engineering program into which the student transfers. The Coordinating Board counts on the work of this committee to update the 2002 Engineering Field of Study on behalf of engineering programs across the state. Your contributions to this effort will benefit thousands of future engineering students. Moreover, as the inaugural committee in the Coordinating Board's project to update and expand fields of study, your collaboration will set the standard for the work that is to come. And I join my colleagues again in welcoming you. Thank you as well to your institutions for volunteering to participate in this important project. Please allow me to introduce the committee's convening co-chairs. First, I introduce Dr. Jim Nelson of the University of Texas at Tyler. Dr. Nelson serves as the Dean of Engineering and Computer Science at UT Tyler. He is a registered professional engineer in 3 states, a chartered engineer in the United Kingdom, and a fellow of the American Society of Engineers. He earned his master's and doctoral degrees in civil engineering from the University of Houston and his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Dayton. He is actively engaged in developing strategies for enhancing STEM education pipeline in Texas and nationally. He served on a committee of the Coordinating Board and Lumina Foundation to develop a statewide articulation compact for mechanical engineering, and he chaired the Tuning Oversight Councils for developing voluntary statewide articulation compacts in 11 other engineering and science disciplines. Joining Dr. Nelson as convening co-chair is Mr. David Galley of Collin College. Mr. Galley serves as the Director of Engineering and Technology Programs at Collin. He earned his baccalaureate and master's degrees in electrical engineering from the University of Delaware, and he has extensive industrial experience in addition to his educational background. Mr. Galley is also actively engaged in developing strategies for enhancing STEM education in the state. He served on the Electrical Engineering Tuning Committee of the Coordinating Board Lumina Foundation project to develop a statewide articulation compact for electrical engineering. And he is involved in leading the partnership between Collin College and the National Convergence Technology Center funded by the National Science Foundation. I want also to introduce you to the Coordinating Board executive staff who will be participating in today's meeting. First, Dr. Rex Peebles. Dr. Peebles is Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce. Dr. Peebles will be delivering the charge to the committee and making remarks on the significance of the work we're asking you to undertake. Next, Dr. Gary Tomerlin, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Workforce, who has been instrumental in drafting the Field of Study Advisory Committee rules under which this committee meets. I would like to acknowledge as well Dr. Reinhold Cornelius, who sits in the audience chairs, and whom I know was not expecting to be acknowledged. Dr. Cornelius is Assistant Director of Undergraduate Studies and was active with the tuning committees that operated under the Lumina Foundation grant, and I know some of you remember him from that work, and all of you are familiar with the good work that project got done. I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Steele, Program Director in my division, who will take notes until a recording secretary is elected. I would like to ask, please, if Dr. Mehdi Shadaram is present. Okay, perhaps the weather has delayed or impeded his travel. Dr. Shadaram was among those nominated to serve on this committee, and we have invited all nominees to be here today. I see no other individuals here who might be nominees, so I will move on. Finally, allow me to introduce Dr. Mary Smith. She's the Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy and Interim Assistant Commissioner for College Readiness and Success. Now, many of you need no introduction to Dr. Smith because you worked with her during the 4-year period from January 2010 through December 2013 when she served as the project director for the productivity grant awarded to Texas from the Lumina Foundation. Now, I've asked Dr. Smith to lead your orientation to the resources we are providing you and to brief you on the background of the state's efforts to provide engineering majors with a high-quality, efficient, and affordable pathway to earning a bachelor's degree. But right now, I will ask Dr. Smith, would you like to say a few words as we begin the meeting?
Just very briefly. It really was my honor and privilege to coordinate that grant, and it'll be my honor and privilege again to work with you again on this particular field of study for engineering, so I'm really delighted to be a part of it. Just very briefly, in December of 2010, Texas was one of 10 states to get a planning grant from Lumina Foundation to make the opportunity of going to college more affordable for the state and for students. And so we worked on 3 projects that are relevant here to a certain extent, which we'll talk about later. And then, as a result of the successful work of the planning grant, we did get, in 2009, the full grant, $1.8 million from the Lumina Foundation to continue the work of the Mechanical Engineering Transfer Compact Committee and to work on the tuning process as a pilot state. So I'll be going over that a little bit more when we go through the materials, but for now I'll turn it back to Mindy so that we can continue the introductions.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. I want to turn now this program over to your convening chair, Jim Nelson, and convening co-chair, Dave Galley.
Thank you. It's good that everybody showed up despite the weather. I think we need a vote to get a better weatherman than Gary in the future so we can solve this issue. But as we begin, I think a lot of us know each other from previous meetings. But I think why don't we just go around the room and just introduce ourselves, where we're from, and just maybe a sentence or two, short sentences or two about kind of the things that we've been doing and pretty much what brings us to the table here. I think Dave and I have been introduced already. Mindy, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and just go around the table that way?
Sure. I've introduced myself, program director here with the coordinating board, background in community college education, very committed to seeing this committee through to its fruition and the work it's going to do. And with that, I'll pass it onward.
Yes, my name is Dan Lindley, and I'm from Del Mar College. 25 years practicing chemical engineer. This is one of those encore careers, so I'm now a professor of chemistry and chemical engineering at Del Mar. And luckily that Lumina study took place, and so we have implemented the chemical engineering pathway, and I'm doing it.
I was going to mention Mindy is left-handed, and I'm left-handed too, so that's a good qualification. Larry Pill from Texas A&M at Kingsville, and the chair of the Mechanical Industrial Engineering Department. This is my first time on a committee like this, but I've always pushed to improve our education for engineering and always want to make what we do better. And I'm also, with my undergraduate education, I was a junior college transfer, and I was actually able to stay overseas for a little while, and so I see the usefulness of a work like this.
I'm Rachel Zan. My background is material science and engineering and electric engineering. I worked in the industry before as an engineer, and now I'm teaching at Tarrant County College.
Pranesh Ashpat, I'm the Associate Dean in the College of Engineering at UT Arlington. Most of my responsibilities normally are in the graduate program, but I'm also coordinating the entire online education program in the college, as well as some of the new initiatives in competency-based education and flipped classroom, which are more directed towards the undergraduate program. So that's the reason I'm here.
Martin Connect with South Texas College. I'm the assistant chair to the Physical Science and Engineering Department and coordinate the engineering program at the college. I also had the opportunity to be a part of the Tuning Council previously.
Martinez, Tarleton State University, the department chair for engineering and computer science, and my background is electrical.
Connie Gomez, Galveston College. I'm the head of our engineering department. It's mechanical and industrial.
All right, I'm Larry Larson, simply a professor at Texas State University in one of the newer programs in the state kind of period. I also am an industrial refugee, 25 years in the semiconductor manufacturing field, most of which was at Semitech right here in Austin.
I'm Dan Dimitriou. I'm the coordinator of the engineering program at San Antonio College and also for the entire Alamo colleges. I am really proud to be here, and I love to report the success that we have in our program. When I started 15 years ago, we had 186 declared majors in engineering. Now we have 852. That makes us the 5th program in the Alamo colleges. And to tell you the truth, I'm a refugee from industry. I had a career of 20 years in industry, and then I navigated into community college. So I built the program, and I'm here to help build stronger ties with four-year institutions.
Hi, good morning. Eddie O from A&M Commerce, Department Head of Engineering and Technology, and my background is civil engineering and construction.
Good morning. My name is Roderick Crowder. I am full-time faculty, program coordinator, and curriculum chair for engineering for Richardson College. I'm the guy they blame when everything goes wrong, basically. Unfortunately, and I've participated in the tuning committees previously, and I am very passionate about this work. We have been able to make new pathways for hundreds and hundreds of students at Richardson College, not only in the undergraduate program, but we've actually began to matriculate students that have previous baccalaureate degrees into the master's program. So in coming here and doing this work, I want to help and further align that and make that transition more effortless and smooth for the undergraduate students who are trying to pursue their degrees in engineering.
I'm Terry Reed. I'm Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs for Texas A&M. And my background is I'm a petroleum engineer and worked for years in the oil industry, actually here in Texas, before going into academia. And I've been Associate Dean or Assistant Dean at 3 major institutions. And my background is in engineering education research, access, success, and pathways. Thank you for using the word pathways. As a petroleum engineer, pipelines are just negative for me. Anything that gets in the wrong way is a failure. Anything that gets out the wrong way is a failure. And we pig them to make sure that they go through correctly, right? So I don't think that's how we relate to students. And students are my passion, especially undergrads, so I deal a lot with graduate students. And I'm looking forward to the committee and its work.
I'm April Andrews. I'm a systems engineer. I worked in the industry for 5-something years. Before going into academia, I teach engineering courses at McLennan Community College. I've gotten to know a lot of you guys by working on various tuning stuff and submitting paperwork and all kinds of exciting experiences. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Hi, I'm Xia Lin. I serve as an associate dean in college engineering. I coordinate curriculum changes in the engineering program. My teaching area is mechanical engineering. By the way, Prairie View is northwest side of Houston, is about half-hour drive.
I'm Dan McDonald. I retired from the Air Force 10 years ago. Spent 26 years, 4,000 flying hours. Probably the only aeronautical engineer here. I worked on several high-profile programs while I was in the Air Force. B-2, Joint Stars, things like that. Retired, moved to Northeast Texas, live up north of Longview, decided to go over to Kilgore, and they hired me for the math department, not really sure why. But last summer, Dr. Alan Morris, I don't know if any of you remember, he decided to just up and move in about a week, and so I took over the engineering department. So I am the engineering department, by the way. So looking for all sorts of input, what we're going to trying to do some new things. They're changing things around a little bit, going more toward materials and things like that. And I think we're getting some good interest.
Vic Zaloom, Lamar University Interim Dean of Engineering for the last 2 years, and prior to that, Interim Dean of the Graduate School for 3 years. So I'm getting tired of this Interim Dean stuff. But my background is industrial engineering, and I've served on the Mechanical Engineering Tuning Committee and the Industrial Engineering Tuning Committee. So this is my 3rd time back.
Bart Scheinberg. I serve as director of the West Houston Center for Science and Engineering, part of Houston Community College. I had the opportunity to serve on the initial mechanical engineering tuning committee. Looked at the results of that. One of the things that happened from that committee, as well as the following committees, is that structure, I think, has helped promote engineering at the Houston Community College. We've had a substantial increase in the number of our engineering students. And I think, as Terry said, we are developing both academic and career pathways for those students. So it turns out to be very important. So, again, a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'm John Eckert. I'm Associate Dean for Research at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm also a faculty member in the Department of Chemical Engineering, and I'm here to represent the University of Texas in these deliberations.
Gary Tomerlin. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a weatherman. But my background is community colleges, and I've been a faculty member in many other roles. And so I'm here at the coordinating board now, and glad y'all are all here.
We'll come back later. Okay. Hi, hello. My name is Mariano Olmos. I'm the engineering coordinator at El Paso Community College. I'm also an engineering professor. In the industry, I work for Lucent Technologies as a power engineer. I'm a double major, mechanical and electrical. Since the last time that I was here, our enrollment has grown 500%. Thank you.
A lot of faces that are coming back again. I think we've accomplished a lot, and I think, personally, what we've done, I think you'd agree, David, with, the numbers were talked about of things that have occurred since the tuning compacts, the voluntary tuning compacts. I became a part of things that the engineering enrollments have really begun to blossom, which is really critical looking at the engineering needs that are within the state. There's some predictions that are as high as 88,000 more engineers needed by 2025. Now, that doesn't count those of us that are old and gray and are going to be retired by 2025. In fact, just some other statistics, I think, which leads to the importance of what we're doing. And I'd just like to get on the table as we do that. A statistic I heard last week down in Corpus Christi at the Project Lead the Way meeting. Dr. Vince Bertram was the keynote speaker, who's the executive director of Project Lead the Way. And he cited the statistic that nationally there's 2.35 engineering positions available for every engineer that's graduating. And the flip side of that, there are 3 graduates for every non-STEM position that is available. So I think, the mission that we've got before us is very, very important to the state, as to the nation. And within that context, I think we both are looking very much forward to the work that we accomplish here on the next few meetings that we have.
I think the critical juncture from the perspective of the two-year college is to make sure that we're feeding the pipeline properly. We clearly have a mission to get as many high school students into this STEM pathway as we possibly can, particularly in engineering and particularly in underrepresented groups, ladies in particular. And from our work at Collin College, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we have as seamless a set of pathways as possible. That's what this group is, I think, very critical in trying to produce and trying to clarify. The engineering field of study has been a problem at our institution for many years. I've been the director of engineering for 7 years. I'm a refugee from Silicon Valley for 30 years before coming into education, and I never really have understood our very narrow interpretation of the field of study at our institution. I haven't been able to change it, but I haven't ever understood it. And so with that in mind, I think this work is absolutely critical for us to move forward with. We did an awful lot of work with the voluntary engineering compacts, and those have, I think, served us well as institutional guidelines for transfer for students. Probably the most important thing that we have in front of us today is the notion of trying to integrate the engineering field of study with some of those voluntary compact issues that we've all signed up for. So I look forward to serving you and trying to facilitate this particular group moving forward to the betterment of all these students that we have that we now are encouraging with House Bill 5 to get into engineering. There is a flood coming. I work with the high schools, and if you don't, you should know there's a flood of engineering students and STEM students that are coming based on House Bill 5. And the ISDs are really trying to, in some way, work with that flood. They're the ones that have the budget problems now. They're the ones that are looking for teachers and instructors now. But those students are going to be coming to your institutions. Many of them have financial considerations that cause them not to be able to go directly to a four-year institution. And with that in mind, especially in underrepresented groups, we need to make sure that we clearly proceed as a team for the next period of time to get those pathways clarified so that those students that are way that we are going to increase the diameter of the STEM pathway or pipeline are actually able to do so.
Just one thing I'd like to reinforce with just a little statistics about the real nature of the problem that David mentioned, and that goes back to where the students are starting and the importance of the 2-year to 4-year pathway in particular. In any given year in Texas, there's approximately 170,000 first-time freshmen that start at the state's public institutions, either 2-year or 4-year. 2/3 of those kids are starting at the 2-year institutions. Only 1/3 are starting at the 4-year institutions. Honing that down a little bit, again, at any particular point in time, of that 170,000 that starts each year, only about 5% are actually declaring engineering as a major or getting a degree in engineering at any time during the next 6-year period, which is really a very small number when you do the multiplication. Of that 5%, what's interesting is 3/4 start at the 4-year institution, only 1/4 are starting at the 2-year institution. So clearly we've got a pathway issue when 2/3 of the freshmen are at the 2-year side of the house. The scary part, and I think where it comes back to the relevance and really what we're putting into the work here that helps too, is of that 5%, now start doing the math here and you can see why we need 88,000 more. Of the 5% of the 170,000, only about a third, about 35%, actually gets a degree, a baccalaureate degree in engineering. There's about another 17%, 15% that gets a baccalaureate degree in something else. But so we just keep taking the 170,000 down to 5%, down to a third of the 5%, and these numbers get smaller and smaller. A lot of it goes back to the pathways, which I think is reinforced. At least with the dream that Dave and I've had going through a lot of the work that we've done over the past few years, and what Dan said, going from 180 to 800 students, I think it's evidence that with a clearly defined pathway, with a set of course that students can relate to, that they can really begin to move forward in engineering at all of the state's institutions.
I think we also have to recognize as a group that the state of Texas is effectively a small United States. Texas has just as diverse a population of industries as the United States does, and not all parts of Texas are covered by those industries. And so institutions are directly related to geographic areas. And with that in mind, institutions have to work together to facilitate the industrial folks that are in that particular geographic area. And so while in North Texas, we don't have chemical engineering as an important part of our program, that's not the case on the coast. It's not the case in Houston, et cetera. And so we as an aggregate group need to make sure that we are focused on the entire puzzle and not just a few of the pieces of it. To enhance something that Jim said, we work with industry an awful lot at a 2-year institution because we have 2-year terminal degrees as well. And one of the things that the power companies are telling us is that the average age of a power company worker right now in technology is about 57. They will, in the United States, they will be effectively moving on at 65 based on union rules and other things. They may keep a person that needs to be kept for a nuclear power plant or something like that that's a critical employee. But in general, we need to recognize that in about 7 or 8 years, about half of the power utility workers in technology are going to convert to retirement. that, if you back it into the pipeline, means that students that are in the pipeline at this point or just starting the pathway at this point are going to be popping out with their bachelor's degree to service that need in 7 years. And so industry is really scared. Texas Instruments, who we work with a lot at Collin College, is very concerned because they haven't hired many new engineers for a long time. And so they have as a tacit desire to hire engineers that are less than 35 years old. And while that may appear to be some level of age discrimination, the fact from their perspective is their workforce is graying and they have a real need as a business to maintain a going concern. And so the students that we're putting out now, the young people that have been put out in the last 15 years, are critical to their business, and they're just one example of businesses that are really trying to engage us in higher education for the benefit of their business and their industry and their community. And so I think our charge is extremely important. I think this couldn't have come at a better time, and I think it's time that we really fixed the field of study.
Mindy, do you want to continue then?
Yes. Apologies. The next item on the agenda is the election of co-chairs and a recording secretary. First, we'll take up the election of co-chairs, who will be responsible for conducting meetings and conveying committee recommendations to the board. The terms of the chairs will be 2 years from the date of this election. I will begin by nominating our convening co-chairs, Dr. Jim Nelson, Mr. Dave Galley, for the full term as committee co-chairs. And I will ask for other nominations from the floor, should there be any.
Mindy, we have to open it up to let the committee do nominations. We as the coordinating board, can't nominate. Sorry. We're observers. We're happy to be here.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for that correction, Dr. Tomerlin. I will call then for nominations from the floor. Mr. Scheinberg.
Co-chairs.
Do we have other nominations? We have a nomination then and a second.
I just wanted to ask, I can't tell where everybody's from. Do we have someone from a four-year and from a community college? Okay,
I'm from Collin County Community College.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. You're sitting right there.
We rebranded ourselves as Collin College because we are in negotiations to do some four-year degrees.
Oh, okay, just checking.
The rebranding. I apologize.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
And maybe if I can interrupt just a second, anybody can self-nominate as well, and you can nominate the person next to you. So any of those kind of things. But then maybe just to back up just a minute, the committee has to operate under the rules of government code. Texas Government Code, I'm pretty sure it's Chapter 2110, which limits us to 24. In 2110, do you know? I got that one right, apparently. If not, maybe our general counsel is listening and will correct me. But we have to operate by very formal, specific rules, and that's why we're doing this. But anyway, so with that said, anybody that wants to nominate anybody can, except for Rex, myself, Mindy, and a couple others. Mary.
Are there other nominations?
I'll nominate David if he hasn't been nominated, David Galley.
We have 2 nominations for the 2 roles as co-chairs. Do we have a second? We have a second. And a second if we need it. Thank you, Dr. Lindley. There being no other nominations, I will call for a motion of election by acclamation. So moved. Second. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Very good. Okay.
Thank you for your vote of confidence. I'll remember to turn the electricity on occasionally. My wife thanks you for that, too. It keeps me away from home more, which will keep everybody happy. There you go. Dave, I look forward to working with you again as we continue this process. As Mindy said, according to my notes. You were very well scripted coming down through the process. The next thing is to go ahead and elect the recording secretary. The recording secretary will keep all the documentation on the committee's work, and it's a very important part of this process. In that regard, do we have a nomination for recording secretary? And please, if you'd like to, feel free to nominate yourself.
I'd like to nominate Bart.
Second that.
Are there any additional nominations for recording secretary? Okay, hearing none, Bart has been nominated and that nomination has been seconded. Could I have a motion that we elect Bart as recording secretary by acclamation? Okay, move second. All in favor of Bart serving as recording secretary, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, let the record show that other than one nay and jest, the vote was unanimous for Bart to become the recording secretary.
So, following the lead of James Nelson, thank you very much, I think. And I guess I will coordinate with Mindy, and we'll make sure that the notes are correct and keep my bias out of it as much as possible. You've been a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, the next order of business is the establishing staggered terms for the members of the committee. As Gary indicated, a typical appointment is for a period of 2 years, but in need and for continuity, there can be 3-year appointments. The procedure that has been established to do this is just kind of going to be the luck of the draw. The coordinating board for the 2-year and the 4-year side, again, to make sure we maintain a balanced committee on both sides of the House, has prepared slips with 2 years and 3 years for both the community college members within the room and for the 4-year members that are within the room. What we'll do is pass the bowls around. Mindy, which is the 2-year?
Pink. Pink are 2 years.
Mindy, we're all engineers. Engineers don't do pink. Could we call that purple, please?
Indeed, sir. Purple are 2 years. Yellow are 4 years.
So just the procedure then is just go ahead and draw one of the pieces out. That'll have either a 2 or a 3 on it, I believe, and that'll be your sentence for the committee as we move forward.
Jim, is the plan that whenever we rotate off that someone else from our institution rotates back on?
I don't think we've gotten down and discussed that point yet. I don't think it's by institution. I think it's by nomination.
Okay.
Yeah, and just so you all know what we hope to do, and Mindy, I think, spoke to this a little bit. This is day one of a major project that we're undertaking of fields of study, not only engineering, but we are working on music. And then from there, hopefully we're going to go down the road and work in many different academic disciplines. But again, by rule, and by rule, it's not coordinating board rule, it's state statute, our board has to appoint committee members. And so whenever your term is up, we will have to go through a nomination process, much like we did in convening this committee, to replace the people that rotate off. And so you can't, a college cannot necessarily hold a seat in forever. But just so you'll know, what we hope to do is come back, perhaps if we can complete this work in 6 months or whatever the time interval is, perhaps in 2 years to come back and reaffirm and have a conversation about, yes, it's still current and relevant. And then again, by rule, the committee is abolished in 4 years unless our board reestablishes it. And so that's kind of some of the rules that we're operating under.
Okay, any other questions in that regard? I think everybody's got their term of service on the committee. Are we going to have any dickering back and forth? I'll swap you 1 2 year for 2 years or... Okay, with that, I think the next order of business then is going to be a discussion of the committee charge and the orientation to resources. Rex, can you please charge the committee with what it needs to be doing? And Mary, you're going to be leading the discussion of the resources that are available to us? Yes, sir. Rex?
I will, let me give you just a little bit of the bigger picture background for all of this. And first of all, let me thank you for agreeing to serve on this committee. I think this is really important work. And I recognize several names, especially since we put engineering programs under such great scrutiny. And so, you know, I'm the one that gets to sign off on the approval and the rejection letters as well. So, as some of you may have experienced in recent history. So, I mean, there are 2 of you right there. So I recognize. It's interesting comments about workforce need, because that's one of the issues that we grapple with extensively. And one of the things I've noticed is that for just about everybody who says there's a shortage of engineers, there's somebody else who says there's not. And they both have all kinds of stuff about why, what is true and what is not true. And so who knows? But that's a separate issue from this, although over the long run it is related in terms of making sure that we meet the workforce needs of the state. Many of you are familiar with what is often called the completion agenda, and that is the idea that we should get students through, I won't use the word pipeline, okay, yeah. But we should get them through their chosen major, their field of their program of study, or whatever you want to call it. But really, for those of us in academia, it's a major that they do at a college. And so, the idea is to get them through the majors as quickly as possible, and to minimize the time that they spend at an institution. The average graduate at a 4-year university right now in a bachelor's degree takes about 146, 47 hours to get there. That's out of a typical 120-hour degree. So most of them are taking 25 to 30 hours more than they need to. Unfortunately, it's even worse for an associate's degree. The average number of hours for a typical 60-hour associate's degree is 94 hours. So, and I think a lot of that happens at both levels. One of the things I asked this question the other day of the data folks. I said, so how much of that is accounted for by D's, F's, and W's? Okay. In other words, if you're taking 146 hours, is that because you withdrew, failed, or got a D in 25 of those hours and had to repeat those things? We know that that's a part of it, but it's certainly not all of it. There's actually a bill that has been introduced to the legislature regarding, and I forget exactly how the nature of the bill is really not important. It's what drove the bill in the first place that's kind of important, and that is one student who went to a community college and then transferred to a 4-year institution in engineering, by the way, and wound up losing a lot of hours in that transfer. Okay, and that's one student. I mean, that whole bill is based on one complaint from one constituent. Okay, and it's these things that are designed to try to address that to some extent. So this is a part of a much larger completion agenda. It's also a move on the part of the coordinating board to make an effort to revive, expand, and revise fields of study. So for those of you who are familiar with these things already, they are the hours typically beyond the core curriculum that are lower division that must be accepted and applied to a degree at a 4-year institution. And so I think it's one of the things is to keep in mind as you go through this work, because the statute is very clear that when you have a field of study, if students take courses in that field of study, then those courses must be applied to that major at any publicly supported 4-year institution in the state of Texas.
This sounds silly. Can you clarify what you mean by must and apply to degree?
Well, let me start with the latter first. There's an old saying about everything transfers, but not everything applies. So in the terms of application, if your engineering degree is the typical engineering degree in Texas is about 126 hours or so. So if you have a 126-hour engineering degree, then if the field of study is, say, 12 hours, then 12 hours of that 126. So it has to be applied to that degree. It has to count toward graduation requirements for that degree. So that's application. That's in statute, and it has been in statute for a lot of years. What has happened is that the current fields of study, there are 8 of them, are not widely used. Part of it is because they've gotten out of date and old, quite frankly. I mean, these things do need to be updated on a routine basis so that they keep up with the changes in curriculum that really comes from you guys. So that's the applicability part about it. And so the must is that by law they have to be applied. I mean, it clearly says it in statute that if the student takes those courses, then they must be applied. So as you go through this work, I think it's very important to keep in mind that these things must be applied. And a student that winds up in a position where they've taken some of these courses and then they are not applied to their degree at a publicly supported four-year institution in Texas, then they can, through what's called the transfer dispute resolution process, call upon the coordinating board to then remind institutions of what the law is. Okay, which is not necessarily something that I would look forward to doing if I didn't have to. Okay, and so forth. And then Gary just wrote me a note that said, "This assumes the student meets admissions criteria," but I've got talking anything about admissions criteria. That's a whole other issue. But once the student, yeah, I mean, but that is a good point though, because the credit is applied. That does assume that the student has been admitted to that program and that they meet the admissions criteria for that program, by the way. So if they do not, then that's off the table. So that is thank you. That's actually a good point to make, because this does not take away. The statute doesn't even address the issue of admissions criteria at all, so it does not take away from institutions their ability to establish their admissions criteria, not only for the institution but also for the programs within their institution as well. And that's done, there's a lot of different ways to do that, by program, by college, by school, and so forth. But none of that is touched by this legislation. So it's a good point. Assuming that students do meet the admissions criteria, then those courses must then apply. So, the work that you're doing here is determining what those courses are going to be, and that's very important from both the institutional point of view of what is it that you're willing to accept on some level, but it's also important from the point of view of what do the students need. At that lower division level, what do students need to be adequately prepared to be an engineer of whatever guise that might be. Okay, so so the idea is to identify those hours. The specific charge is to identify the block of courses which may be transferred to a general academic teaching institution and must be substituted for that institution's lower division requirements for the engineering degree program into which the student transfers. Yes, sir.
I have a small question. How our work will affect the work that we did in the compacts that we had for mechanical, electrical, civil, and so on? The reason why I'm asking that, several universities did not sign the compact. So all work that we did was good for the little ones, but not all universities signed the compacts. So we'll have the same effect. I'm just asking because I had to face the students that came to ask why the course doesn't go there. I support our courses with the compacts. That's all I have.
The answer is no. It doesn't have any effect in a sense. But remember, the compacts are voluntary. Okay, and the compacts are essentially a list of courses that can be applied to degrees. And every institution, both 2- and 4-year, entered into those compacts on a voluntary basis. In that sense, there is nothing voluntary about fields of study. They're established by state law, and once the field of study is established, then it applies to, as the chart says, to a general academic teaching institution, and that's all 38 of them in the state of Texas that are 4-year publicly supported institutions. Does not apply to private universities, but yeah, but so and I think that's why this is such something to always keep in mind about this, is that this has the force of law behind it, and voluntary compacts do not.
Will this block of courses extend to general education requirements, or are we just identifying field of study blocks?
One of the things that we're going to request that you do is, while you're identifying those courses beyond the core that may be applied to the major, but that you also, where it's appropriate, also identify the core curriculum courses that students should take. And because what we know is that if you're going to be an engineer, as a general rule, you probably wouldn't take biology as your natural science. You probably need to be taking physics.
Are you expecting this degree to be core complete? You're not expecting this to be core complete, right?
This is not a degree.
Well, yes, sorry, field of study. You're not expecting this field of study to be core complete.
Fields of study are beyond the core curriculum.
So it can be over 60 hours, or are we still sticking with the 60 hours for a field of study?
Well, fields of study are typically 12 to 18 because it is beyond the core curriculum, which is 42. 60 is the maximum number of hours allowed for an associate's degree. So 60 minus 42 is 18. Now, there's a little caveat in this, because rules do allow for fields of study that, combined with the core, that may be beyond 60 hours if it is found that there are, or for two reasons. One is that there are lower division courses beyond the 60 that 4-year institutions will accept. But the other is that you can have what used to be referred to as an inverted degree, for reasons that are not quite clear to me. But be that as it may, the idea is that you can actually then wind up with an associate's degree that would not be core complete because there are field of study courses that are beyond the 18. And engineering is one of those fields, much like music, where the sequencing of courses is so important, and that you need to take courses, the first one, the second one, the third one, and the fourth one, and you need to take them in that order, because clearly one builds on the other. And sometimes you need to do that over more than, at the upper division level, over more than 2 years. That it really behooves you to go back and take some of that in your freshman or sophomore years. So in that sense, then you can wind up with an associate's degree that the field of study combined with the core curriculum could result in an associate's degree that is greater than 60 hours. That is possible. But it gets a little tricky, because the field of study is something that is sort of separate from the core curriculum. But the reality is they work in tandem. And I do think it's important that is part of what you consider is the courses that students need to take at the lower division level. What courses of those that can be recommended that they also take as a part of the core? If you're really interested in time to degree, one of the things that ought to be considered is, where is it possible to double dip, so to speak, that you're satisfying core requirements, but you're also satisfying major degree requirements as well. So, yes, sir.
I kind of wanted to add to what April was asking about, specifically about the core. It's one of the challenges that I've had in at my institution, as students are going through the programs and pursuing the particular degrees. There's core doesn't mean the same to every single institution. What are core requirements, what makes a student core complete within my district is not the same as what makes a student core complete at another institution in terms of specific courses. So what we end up with in engineering are students that had to make a choice, specifically when we reduced the number of hours to 60 in all of the undergrad, all the 2-year programs. The students we were having to make the choice between whether or not the students would have been core complete with us, which would have included coursework that they did not need at the senior institution, or whether or not we remove that requirement so they would only take courses at the senior institution that were applicable to their degree, because we were all aware and cognizant that of this number that we do not want them to exceed. We're telling them with great fervor that we don't want them to take courses that they do not need. So it was a very fair question when a student asked me, well, why do I have to take this course to complete the core when that course is not required for me at the senior institution? And for me to become an engineer, I must get my baccalaureate degree. So in response to those things and many others, we've removed all of those requirements as we create our degree pathways and, plans or, guidelines for the students as they're moving on. But it makes a lot of the folks that I work for unhappy, because I'm not creating core completers anymore for engineering. It's their competing interests. So I was wondering, what we mean, how we'll address that here to bridge that gap.
Well, I mean, that's one of the things that as a committee y'all need to look at and discuss. And we just went through the 60-hour rule. I mean, for the four-year institutions, you'll recall that a couple of legislative sessions ago, or whenever it was, you were required to reduce all of your four-year degrees to 120 hours unless a compelling academic reason could be given for it. In the last legislative session that went into effect this last fall, or goes into effect this coming fall, I'm sorry, there was legislation that said that the two-year schools can't have associate degrees that are more than 60 hours unless a compelling academic reason is offered. And we just went through that process. And one of the things that, and we actually discussed this at some length internally, was what to do about the engineering fields and how that all, the degrees all work with the core plus the field of study. And what we finally decided to do, because this is one of those issues where the timing was bad, so to speak. What we decided to do was to at least at the moment, was to limit those degrees to 60 hours, with the caveat that the work of this committee may or could result in something greater than that. And what I'm interested in, from my position is, what's in the best interest of students going forward. And regardless of what institution they're at, whether they start at a 4-year or 2-year, or they do what a lot of students do these days, they start at one and go to another one and then go to another one, or they go to two at one time, or, that's the swirling issue. But over the long run, what I'm interested in is what's going to serve them best in terms of getting the degree that they want and the degree that the state of Texas needs in as timely a fashion as they can. Now, I'm not personally not really necessarily big on this idea that they got to do it in 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. Graduation rates are really interesting. The 6-year graduation rate is different than the 4-year, and if you kind of factor in, well, how many semester hours were they taking? The interesting thing is that over a 10-year time period, whether they finished in 4, 6, 8, or 10, the average number of semester hours to their degree is about the same, regardless of whether it was 4, 6, 8, or 10. And what that tells you is that you're accounting for students who are full-time and part-time and more part-time and even more part-time, as a general rule, than you are the fact that those. Now, on the other hand, they're all taking about 146 to get there. So you have sort of that double whammy with it. But so in the long run, my interest in it is what's in the best interest of students, and what is it that they need to do to be successful engineers when they graduate in the end. I mean, that's also the end point too. And in all of this, we need to make sure that we don't lose anything in rigor while we're doing all of this. Okay, because that's, in the long run, the students are going to need that in order to be successful in whatever career they choose afterwards, whether they wind up actually being engineers or they wind up in some other profession that they draw off of that engineering background. In the end, we want them to be competent when they come out. And if that results in in a 60-hour associate's degree or a 126-hour bachelor's degree or a 66-hour associate's and a 127-hour bachelor's degree. That's all fine and good, and that's something that this committee really needs to undertake. But we got kind of caught in this bind of we need to do this. That's a legislative mandate about the 60 hours, but we're going to start this up. So over the long run, we may be able to, hopefully we can fix some of those issues at the same time.
I have another question.
Hang on just a minute. He had his hand up first.
Good student there. Yes, my question is just really a follow-up on yours anyway. When looking at the tuning study, for instance, chemical engineering, which we just implemented at Del Mar, and it recommends 72 hours of transfer hours in chemical engineering, and it's really a lot of that is the field of study kind of coursework. Well, of course, by mandate, we're at 60 hours, and some schools, like for instance, the University of Houston, in their catalog says they will accept no more than 66 transfer hours, period. What does this mean? If a student takes relevant courses in their field of study and it's above, let's say, the 66 hours, then does that mean that those are just wasted hours? These are really serious questions our students are asking us.
Well, and the way the current rules work is the answer to that is yes, they could be wasted hours in some sense, because a lot depends on what the receiving institution is going to accept. Okay, I think this is still in coordinating board rules somewhere. I was actually going to look this up the other day and then forgot about it. But at one point, there was statements made about receiving institutions may accept up to 66 hours in lower division credit. Now, actually, they could. The reality is there's caveats in that, so you could actually accept more than that. But I do think one of the charges of this committee is to take a serious look at that little issue of how many lower division hours are really appropriate in a degree. And the norm in higher education for ever since I can remember and has been that if you have a 120-hour degree, that roughly half of it is lower division and half of it is upper division. And there's a lot of good reason for that, by the way. I mean, there's a lot about that makes really good sense. And so how much do you want to put into a degree that covers both of those? And part of what we're hoping for, and I think that both of the co-chairs kind of alluded to this in their opening remarks, is that part of the work of this committee is to try to seek some clarity to those kind of questions. And it is true that what came out of that, the compact, I think, may be the 72 hours. I was looking at this yesterday, and there was at least 7 or 8 courses in there identified at the lower division level, which tells you that that's 21 or 24 hours, which does take you past the 60 hours. And so I guess my advice to you going forward would be to think about how many lower division hours really isn't appropriate for a degree, because the field of study really, in a lot of ways, through the back door, kind of establishes that idea. And as I said, most fields of study are typically 12 to 18 hours, but that's because of the 42 minus 60 is 18, and so 12 to 18, because there are some fields for which you really can't identify 18 semester hours of specific credit that would be transferable. For example, I don't think you could do that with psychology, for example, which is the second most popular major in the state of Texas. Okay. So anyway, I think those are all questions that y'all need to wrestle with, and then give us your best advice on this stuff.
The other aspect I see is the receiving college accept the subject matter, however, transfer in a lower hour. For instance, I give an example, mechanical drawings in 2-year college normally quote as 3 credit-hour courses. At least at Prairie View, we only consider 1 credit hour. Well, under certain pressure, the college need to reduce hours. We become creative. They say this is 1 credit-hour class. We're still meeting students 3 hours a week. We call it a lab. because lab hours, you can increase our contact hour, and we teach the same material. That way, when we transfer, we do take the subject and transfer in. 3 count 1. There's a 2-hour loose there. And some other colleges, I look at other universities' curriculum, they require chemistry 2 as a starting chemistry. But they require prerequisites of chemistry 2. Means a student have to take chemistry 1, chemistry 2, be able to transfer chemistry 2 to the senior college. However, there's 1 course lost during the transition.
I'm not sure you should be admitting some of this to me. Because the latter one violates actually would probably violate the rule, if not the law, about the 120-hour deal.
I'm not admitting all.
But so then that's okay. You don't have to give me any names. I'm not asking for them. But if that college is in the room, you might want to know that that's probably not legal to do that. But that's something else again. That's one of the things that y'all need to wrestle with is that credit hour issue as well.
Rex, could we continue with the charge? I think as engineers are prone to do, we're getting down into the weeds a little bit, trying to solve the problems which we need to address here. Could perhaps finish with the charge and let Mary provide the background information so we can get down into the detailed piece of these discussions?
I mean, get down into what you've already gotten down into?
I'm sorry. That's basically what I'm saying, sir, as engineers, we tend to do that.
No, I think all of you probably have a really good idea of what you need to be doing here. And I think the questions reflect the issues that arise when you're trying to grapple with how to, get from point A to point B on this thing. And so I will leave it at that, and then we will be glad to try to help you all in any way we can and clarify whatever we can clarify. And again, I look forward to getting the best advice you guys have to give on this. Okay, so thank you.
Mary?
I just wanted to provide a little bit of background. A lot of you have already been involved in our tuning work, so please forgive me, those of you who have already know this information. But as I shared with you before, we had gotten a planning grant, and with that planning grant back in 2008, and then we did the work in 2009, we essentially did 3 projects. One was a policy analysis that's really not relevant to the work that you're going to be doing. The second was the Mechanical Engineering Transfer Compact, which essentially began the work of the tuning committees, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But during the planning grant period, all it was essentially the idea, again, was that as we've heard, the field of study for engineering really was not working. It hasn't been working for quite some time. Complicated questions, not probably provided as much as it could have been from our offices. So lots of issues with it. And so we tried, as a part of our planning grant from the Lumina Foundation, we focused on mechanical engineering to essentially establish the courses that a student would need to take at the lower division level in order to move forward with a baccalaureate degree. And then we also did an analysis of students that start at a 2-year college and a 4-year college and their trajectory on degree completion. So that was the planning grant. And then what happened was, as I mentioned earlier, back in November of 2009, Texas was one of the 7 states that had gotten the planning grant. There were 11 states that got the planning grant. 7 of us got the full grant to continue the state's work that was initiated under the planning grant. So what ended up happening is that the Lumina Foundation was very interested in a process called tuning. And we became a pilot state for this process of tuning, which I'll go over in just a moment. But really, the idea was to integrate the tuning process into the work that was already done by the Voluntary Mechanical Engineering Transfer Compact Committee. It became known as the the Texas Tuning Initiative, and we just really finished it. The idea basically was to make the opportunity of going to college more affordable for students in the state, and to make the higher education outcomes more transparent to all stakeholders, including parents and students and employers. The process itself is faculty-driven, and it includes input from students, recent graduates, and employers. And the idea is to help students understand their expectations, which of course aids students themselves and their professors. And it also helps students understand their employment opportunities. The other way, the other thing that's important about it is that it's designed to focus first on the discipline itself. The discipline, say, for example, of mechanical engineering or of electrical engineering, as what we were working on. In other words, the competencies that are needed for the discipline, the knowledge and the skills and the abilities that are actually needed when the student actually graduates. And then there's a process to determine at what point along the educational pathway does an individual need to actually attain a particular level of competence. So what happened was that the work of the faculty involved in these Texas tuning committees resulted in the tuning, quote unquote, of 12 academic disciplines, 6 of which pertain to engineering, and also, quote unquote, the fine-tuning, or essentially the alignment of course descriptions and learning outcomes at the lower division level so that students would be able to be successful in their upper division courses. So what I really encourage you, on your flash drives, there are the 6 tuned engineering disciplines, and we have sample copies of the full work back behind us. So I really encourage you to take a look at your flash drives and the hard copies. They're all actually designed in exactly the same way, with the tuning definition and then the definition of the actual discipline itself, followed by what the basic competencies are, and then really detailed information about each one of those competencies and the level of essentially Bloom's taxonomy that the student would need to get to by the time they finish their first 2 years, 4 years graduate school, and then into professional life. The work of the committees also were part of our issue was these transfer compacts that we were trying to develop also. So in addition to the tuning work of the discipline, we're course-based here still. So the idea was to determine what courses in the academic course guide manual, or that needed to be added to the course guide manual, were needed in order for students to actually gain the competencies that had been determined by the faculty members would be necessary for that particular student. So, for example, if the professors on the tuning committee believed that particular programming was particularly important for the student by the time they actually make it to the final, finish their first 2 years, what's important is to make sure that there is an opportunity for that student at some point along their educational pathway to gain that particular competency. And in our case, that would be a course probably that the student would need to take at the lower division level to gain that competency. So again, the purpose of the transfer compacts was to enhance these transfer processes and increase the number and the preparedness of students when they transfer from the pre-engineering programs to the 4-year university engineering programs. And as we were just discussing, as Dan asked, there are 19 universities and 66 community and technical colleges that are currently participating in one or more of these engineering transfer agreements. And that's actually eliminated the need for essentially hundreds of one-to-one articulation agreements amongst those colleges and universities. Yes, April.
Well, I'm sorry, I keep asking questions because I get excited. Is your theory, is the hope, is the secret dream that we align the field of study with all the work that was done for tuning?
That we use it to inform the work of the field of study committee. I would say it that way, rather than that we would basically use it. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So I'm going to walk you through some documents that I'm hoping will help you.
Okay, thank you.
I do, again, encourage you to take a look at these transfer course agreements. They're behind me. We do have enough of them to actually pass out for you the actual hard copies. Essentially, the transfer agreements are essentially made up of the Memorandum of Understanding, the Annex A, which is essentially the courses that had been they're placed in the Academic Course Guide Manual, so it was no longer an issue. Once the Academic Course Guide Manual Committee adopted the courses, they went into the Academic Course Guide Manual along with the learning outcomes, the recommended learning outcomes, the minimum learning outcomes that the student would need by the time they finish that particular course, and a common course description. For those of you who are more familiar with the Academic Course Guide Manual, in previous times, there was essentially just a one-line description and no learning outcomes in the Academic Course Guide Manual. And just by way of background, frankly, that almost derailed the work of the Mechanical Engineering Transfer Compact Committee, because again, the universities were not really willing to just simply accept this particular course named X, unless the university knew that X class was about this and the learning outcomes. So long story short, what happened was that there was a subcommittee that came out of the Mechanical Engineering Compact Committee that actually worked on, there was a small subcommittee, collected syllabi from across the state, comparison and contrasting these different things, and it actually began a huge movement here to we now call the Learning Outcomes Project, where other faculty members, not a part of any tuning group or anything, just came together to actually think about what the course was about and what those minimum learning outcomes would be. So I'm getting a little bit off track here, but just so you'll know, the reason that we're talking about all of this is because in your materials and on your flash drives, there are more materials than what is just the field of study for engineering that was adopted by the coordinating board back in 2002. So let me walk you through now in your packets. On your flash drives, right now we are providing you flash drives with materials. And also you'll see in your materials a whole bunch of information about SharePoint. What will happen, you will be all getting an email that indicates a little password so that you'll be able to actually access the SharePoint sites and work together through SharePoint rather than emailing documents all the time. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that's on your these are on your flash drives right now. So the flash drive contains the 6 tuning of engineering documents that were developed in 2011 and 12 for the 6 disciplines: biomedical, chemical, civil, electrical, industrial, and mechanical engineering. There were 65 faculty members who participated on these tuning committees for these engineering disciplines, and we also had thousands of faculty from across the state completing surveys through SurveyMonkey to actually inform the work of the 65 committee members on these tuning committees to actually provide input from their colleagues in the field across the state. The course matrix in your file, I'm going to walk you through now your packet, obviously the agenda and then the charge, and then right behind the charge there's a document that looks like this. It's an Excel spreadsheet, and it shows you the lower division courses for the major that are included in the current field of study for engineering. That's the first column there, and you'll see lots of little footnotes. And part of the reason that the field of study for engineering was so complicated is that it was trying to provide information on all those engineering programs. So there's lots of footnotes, and unfortunately those footnotes, while it makes it more exact, makes it also very much more complicated. So the courses that are in there with the footnotes, you'll need to actually reference the field of study matrix in order to get more information about the footnotes. They're just referencing the field of study curriculum document. Then in the next 6 columns there, those are the courses that are included in the voluntary compacts pertaining to engineering. And again, they're intended to provide the guidance to students with respect to what lower division courses in that particular area are best obtained for moving towards the baccalaureate degree. And then finally, in the last column there, you're going to see the courses that are included in the more recently developed ABET accredited Associate of Science and Engineering Science degree, the ACES degree that we'll be talking about at some point here. I just wanted to make sure that you had that information. That particular degree is an ABET accredited degree that transfers as a block for those individual institutions that sign on to that particular It's not technically a compact. It's a consortium of community colleges and universities that agree to take the entire block of the first 2 years and transfer the entire block as an Associate of Science in Engineering Science. Then the receiving university has a completion curriculum for that particular degree. Yes, Terry.
So can you clarify, you say an ABET accredited degree?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me address that,
yes,
Mary.
Go right ahead.
Yeah.
It's an ABET accreditable degree. The institution offering it needs to seek ABET accreditation.
Absolutely.
But it satisfies the criteria.
Because that was actually one of my concerns, is I'd like to know how many of us are actually ABET evaluators, even in the space, because this is a very important question, and our language has to be very specific.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I apologize. It's once the first graduate, because they won't be able to be, the better word is accreditable.
No, don't even get into that.
Okay.
There's a number of things. Yeah. A degree. They accredit a program at an institution.
Got it. I'm sorry. My mistake, definitely.
Will you provide information? I'm sorry, I'm talking over you.
How does this impact our ability to innovate our curriculum? We periodically look at our curriculum, look at our content, try to make changes to better meet the needs of our students. We try to reach out to our major feeder institutions, but those are the main ones that we look at. But there are innumerable other institutions where we have to accept transfers. So how does this all fit into that whole?
Can we hold on to that for a second?
Right.
Will you provide information on how we can get something ABET accredited? Because I called the ABET people and they said we don't accredit to your institutions. So maybe I was just talking to the wrong person.
Okay. It's a whole separate issue. Yeah, let's talk offline. Depending upon.
Sorry, they said they would not accredit it to your program.
Well, the problem we've run into that problem, and where it comes in, let me just diverge for 30 seconds because it's important here. Within ABET, there are 4 accreditation commissions. There's the Engineering Accreditation Commission, the Engineering Technology Accreditation Commission, the Computing Accreditation Commission, and the Applied Science Accreditation Commission. Okay, within the Engineering Accreditation Commission, that board has said we will not accredit an associate's degree because in their collective opinion, the first degree qualifying one as an engineer is the baccalaureate degree. So EAC, the Engineering Accreditation Commission, does not have an associate's degree to accredit. There have been a number of institutions that have called and talked to the EAC people, and that's the answer that's come back. The ETAC, CAC, and ASAC all will accredit a associate's degree. The degree that Mary's talking about, that statewide Associate of Science in Engineering Science, is accreditable under the Applied Science Accreditation Commission, and they are encouraging going forward with that when an institution is ready. But let's talk more offline on that because that's kind of separate from the discussions we've got here.
Thank you, really. I don't want to be providing any incorrect information because I'm certainly not an expert on the accreditation process. So.
But ABET does get very, very testy on that. So as we use the words, it's ABET accreditable, and an institution can talk about the intention to go forward. We can't use the word that it's an ABET accredited degree except by an institution where indeed that has passed.
Got it.
When Mary's finished, we need to talk about flexibility and that kind of stuff. That's, I think, a very important discussion.
Okay, there's just a couple of other things I just wanted to call your attention to in your packets. On the right side, there's a document that shows you what's on your flash drives. So I encourage you again to really look at the materials that have been worked on. We do have some printed copies for you to actually see, since I don't see that everybody has their laptop with them. Then, of course, there's the accessing the SharePoint, and we'll talk about that. Then the next information there are essentially the rules pertaining to this particular advisory committee. What's happened is that, as Gary can speak to a little bit more if you have any questions, We're revisiting all the fields of study that were developed in the early 2000s. And because we just went through sunset legislation, there are certain requirements now through our Senate Bill 215 that have changed some of our advisory committee rules to the extent where in the January coordinating board meeting, the coordinating board adopted a set of 10 different fields of study advisory committee rules, and you all are the first set of folks that are going to be that will be needing your help with to revise those fields of study. So that's what that document is. So if you wanted to reference anything about your actual committee, that's this document that is showing there is agenda item 9Q1, because frankly it just went to the coordinating board and it's not even up yet on the Secretary of State's website for our rules. The next is, again, our rules pertaining to transfer of credit, core curriculum, and field of study. These are our true rules. If you were to pull up coordinating board rules on our website, this is what you would get. And they essentially mirror the law, which is right behind that, the Education Code, Chapter 61.823. So when we talk about field of study curriculum, and as Rex referred to later, how the fields of study transfer, and to address Dan's question, again, the fields of the work of the tuning committees, the transfer compacts, again, are voluntary. Now, this particular committee will be working on a field of study for engineering that is mandated by the state law. So that's where the difference is. So the transfer compacts can stay the way they are because they're still in existence and institutions are still signing participation in those transfer compacts voluntarily. Essentially, you want to think about it as in terms of if I wanted to have an articulation agreement with the college that is within my own district, that's one thing. That's a one-to-one articulation agreement. The idea of these are they're statewide agreements that if an institution wants to participate in it, they really don't need the one-to-one articulation agreement anymore. And that's the idea, that there would be a statewide agreement that would be voluntary agreed to by these participating institutions. So again, what I would encourage you to do is to not essentially move these all to field of study, but rather to let these transfer agreements that have been worked on over the last few years inform the work of the committee that and to move the state forward with the improved field of study for engineering. Yes, Terry.
I ask a question. Other fields of study, can you provide examples of the?
Yes, I'll be able to. Well, I know
Googled it. I can't find a list.
There's communication. There's a communication field of study. There's a nursing field of study. There were fields of study that have now been adapted to associate degrees in teaching, and then there's criminal justice, business, computer science, right? And there's 9 of them that are still actually. There were 11 developed, 9 of which are still working. But if you were really to look at the statistics, and that's one of the reasons that we're here, if you were to look at the statistics for the students that are core complete in a particular year, we're talking somewhere around the neighborhood of 38 to 40,000 students that are core complete within a year, in a particular year of analysis. But when you look at the fields of study, there's 11 of them, right? 9 are still working, but really there's only maybe 2,000 students in the whole state that are completing one of those fields of study. We're wanting to increase that number.
So just a question on granularity then.
Sure.
The fields that you named are more like art disciplines. So how are we going to navigate the disciplines? I mean, the tuning packs, right, were based on discipline, or
Yes, they're like specific discipline, like electrical versus industrial.
Right.
Right.
So, but the field of study, you see, is supposed to cross all disciplines?
Well, that'll be the decision of this committee.
This is the footnoting I understand here, but is that the law? I mean, I'm asking the law.
The law really just has asked us to develop a field of specific fields of study. And I think that was really one of the issues back in 2002. There were I was not, two of my colleagues were involved in the field of study for engineering. I was involved in the field of study for communication. Same basic thing, though. There's journalism, and then there's communication studies. So if you look at the communication field of study, there are 4 tracks, depending on what emphasis area. The only bad thing about that, in my opinion, is that a student at 18 years old might not necessarily know what specific area of engineering they might want to go into. So in the effort to cover everything and to make everybody agree, the 2002 field of study for engineering is as complicated as it is. So you'll want to in my opinion, it's like a balancing act. How detailed do we need to go? And how, again, as Rex said, what's in it best for the student? Is it best for the student to try to decide at 18 years old that they're going to go for a mechanical engineering versus an electrical engineering? What if they change midstream? So actually it's part of the work of the committee on what will be the best solution to move the student forward in an engineering discipline. Is it to have 1 or 2 fields of study for engineering? Don't know if it's really maybe the best to have 6, because there's 6 now, and whether or not we want to, you all want to convert every one of them into a field of study for engineering, I would caution you a little bit about that. But nevertheless, it really is the work of this committee to determine what's going to be the best revision for this field of study.
And the 12 to 18 hours that were referred to as typical fields of study, those are only engineering domain courses. Is that correct?
Well, that's to be determined by the committee. And in your packet, you asked, what does the law say? And I don't know exactly which page, but it starts out with Education Code Title III, Subtitle B. That is the statute, and it's Chapter 61, Section 61.823, and it doesn't talk about courses per se. As I peruse through there, I mean, it's just talking about the courses that transfer and that kind of stuff. But I will tell you, in our internal conversations as we were planning the rules for this committee, we discussed engineering globally, and then that this committee would tackle the question that you're posing. And I think we do a much better job of having engineering as a field of study. My opinion, I'm not a committee member, I said that already, but that we then say that, well, if you want to do electrical, obviously you need the circuits course, but if you're doing mechanical, perhaps you don't need that. Some of those kind of things. And perhaps, and this is a hypothetical in case any other discipline out there in our world is watching, business is an example, that maybe when we do business, I think there's a lot of lower division commonality in marketing and finance and business and accounting. So I don't know if we'll need a business field of study or if we'll need a field of study for all of those disciplines, if you will. That's still work that needs to evolve, and as we've discussed, this is the starting point because of the need for engineers, the work that was done with the projects that Mary's described. We perhaps thought that we could come in and tackle this, whereas some of them were on ground zero, quite honestly. But as I discussed, this is hopefully day one of a major series of undertakings that will ultimately involve all the disciplines. I think I said this earlier, we're about 2 to 3 months behind where we are with this group on music. And a lot of it's because the music group really kind of reached out to us, and they were anxious to go, and it's like, okay, let's go. And the nomination process, the nomination time period is actually out there right now, and our call for nomination actually ends on Friday. So if any of you are music engineers, I guess, you might have got that email as well.
Acoustic engineers, but not certain music. Thank you.
So as I'm taking notes here, I'm looking at the charge, but I'm listening to the discussion, and the discussion has moved way beyond this charge. Maybe in terms of the specifics because I hear a lot of specifics that have come forth in terms of what this committee is to do. And I'm wondering if it might be helpful, both in terms of being able to provide notes, but also to the other members of the committee, to be able to begin to bullet what the perceptions are as to what this committee is to be doing. And then we send that around and we see if there are other recommendations, other issues that come up. I mean, for instance, maybe somebody has a question about ABET. Well, ABET's not a specific part of this, but yet try to pull those things together so that it makes sense in terms of the notes that are being taken, how we distribute those notes, and I think what the priorities are that the committee members need to be looking at.
That sounds like a good. I'm going to go ahead then, and I'm actually finished with my remarks. If you have any questions, I'm happy to address them, but I'll go ahead and then turn over the meeting back to Jim and Dave.
Okay. With that, I think, Bart, you're on target in the question that was being asked, and we started to skirt that a little bit. What I'd like to do, with y'all's permission, is deviate from the agenda that was laid out a little bit. I think just listening to the discussion, listening to the very free give and take that was here, I don't think anybody has been bashful in voicing their opinion, and I think all opinions can be heard. Plus, given the weather situation that we've got with things that are looking like they're beginning to deteriorate a bit, with a target, as mentioned initially, of trying to finish up by 2 o'clock, what I would suggest, if you all agree, is that instead of breaking for the working groups as a working group lunch and then coming back and reporting back on those groups, which would tend to be a rehash of things, that we go ahead, keep this body together, we grab our lunch, we eat here, we continue the discussions that have been going so we all hear everything and can begin to come to consensus perhaps a little bit more quickly on the major issues. Is that agreeable with everybody, with the target of finishing at 2? I'm seeing heads nodding. Anybody? Okay, with that, let's proceed down that way. Now, what I would like to propose, and listening to what Rex said is the charge of the committee in coming down, what I've tried to pull together as the 2 or 3 critical issues that face us, I would like to propose 3 guiding principles as we continue down through our work. Okay, the first of those guiding principles is that we maintain flexibility for the student. I think with flexibility for the student comes clarity for the student. The second guiding principle that I would like to propose to this group is that we minimize the potential for lost credit hours. Okay, I don't believe we can eliminate the potential for lost credit hours, but I do believe through the work of our committee we can minimize the potential for lost credit hours. And the third guiding principle, which is extremely important and is going to end up making the whole baccalaureate process work in what we're talking about, is that we enable the baccalaureate granting institution to maintain the fabric of its individual programs. Okay. I believe those are the 3 things that have been really talked about coming through from both the 2-year and the 4-year side with the innovation, where the students are going. Can we agree to those guiding principles? And then I know Dave wants to talk for a minute about flexibility, but can we agree to those guiding principles? Okay, what I've proposed, and I think Roderick has a question, is number 1, maintain flexibility for the student. Number 2, minimize the potential for lost credit hours. And number 3, enable the baccalaureate granting institution to maintain the fabric of its degree programs. Okay, Roderick, you had a question, sir?
Just if you could give me a little bit more clarification on that third point. That's the one.
Okay, where it comes within any institution, be it 2-year, 4-year, the faculty really owns the curriculum. The faculty determines the content of the curriculum, and within that, there's going to be different emphases that are within different programs, even by the same name. Some things are considered more important or less important, and the direction and emphases, and that really comes down to a faculty issue at that institution. And in light of faculty governance and who owns the curriculum, that is something that we really can't violate, and we cannot force an institution to do things that is contrary to what it really wants to do with its academic program. But we need to, and that piece really goes back to the first piece of the flexibility. What we're advising the students to do or suggesting that the students do is we've got to recognize that students are going to be going to multiple institutions. I mean, not a student, but the students that we teach within our program can be going to multiple institutions. That receiving institutions are going to have different emphases areas and different considerations that come in. We've got to enable the student to go to those places. We've got to enable the receiving institution to maintain what its faculty wants to do within its program. And if we, in my opinion, if we don't maintain both those sides, we've lost the battle. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay.
Sorry, I thought you was, I apologize for that. I have a strong concern that we also need to recognize that we don't want to set any student up for failure.
Yes.
And I understand flexibility. We talk about loss of credit hours all the time. I mean, this is really important. But the last thing we do is put a student in a situation where they start off wrong with, I mean, there's already transfer shock. There's lots of things that we all deal with in transitioning. But we have to maintain the full knowledge of not setting a student up for failure. And I'm not certain how to word that, but I'm concerned it's not in any of those three guiding principles.
Okay. I just modified the first guiding principle with that because I really believe what you just brought up is the essence of what is there. And I modified that to say flexibility for students to enable success. Yeah, Larry.
I just want to second that. I guess I thought of it in a different form, but I want to second that. And also the part about the minimizing potential for loss of credit hours. I guess the potential is the key word there, because if a student has been advised well, or maybe they're just taking a lot at once. I mean, I advise a lot of transfer students, and I was a transfer student. We get a lot of them, and I think they add a lot. But yeah, if we're not, we need to maintain the rigorousness. We maintain the quality of our program, and if they've taken a lot of courses that are not really relevant, or especially a lot of general ed courses, then they may lose a lot. And so I think that's part of it. I want to make sure that we're not watering down our program to so that not losing credit hours.
I think, Larry, what you've gone to is really the essence of the work. It's what Terry and April both alluded to earlier, is what is going to be contained within the field of study.
Yes.
In essence, what is I think mathematically the greatest common denominator. You know, what can we advise students? And within that, a student, and we cannot forget this, that a student is going to have to bear some responsibility too.
Yes.
I can just look at our two institutions. I mean, if a student decides to take field surveying and they come and study with us, it will count for the curriculum because our civil engineering program has it. Terry's shaking her head no, so A&M is there, and I know UT Arlington does not have field surveying. So, you know, within that, probably surveying shouldn't be in the field of study. So let's look at that common denominator across disciplines to enable this to happen and what can get wrapped in. I think that's part of the discussion. So, okay, let's say Dan and then Roderick, and then let's come back and see if we can agree to these principles. But before that, Dave wanted to comment on a piece of it.
I think there's kind of the need for perspective here. So at risk of elongating this, when the field study was put out, the voluntary compacts hadn't been discussed. When the voluntary compacts were discussed and we worked through them, we were all under a 72-hour rule for associate's degrees. So the 72-hour rule worked well for the voluntary compact. That all changed. The compacts didn't change. The signatories didn't change. We didn't even get together. This is our first opportunity to get together since all those changes have occurred. So there are lots of sensitivities around the table regarding that history. And I think that's why we're all here, because we all have a different point of view from our institution's perspective. So that's really, really important to recognize as a team, as we bond and as we try to make something that works for the students work. Second, I think, speaking from the two-year institution's perspective, I'm very happy that the committee was constructed with the two-year institutions having an equal set of seats at the table. And the reason is that the perspective of the two-year institution is very different than the perspective of the four-year institution, because a receiving institution has the institution and the institution's integrity to worry about. And the two-year institution does not have a single institution that's a receiving institution. We have many. And so when I talked about the notion of the geographic situation, the geographic situation does cause us to, as a two-year institution, have favored receiving institutions, but that doesn't mean we have exclusivity to an institution in terms of the pathway. And so from that perspective, we all have different kind of sets of baggage that we bring to the table, and I say baggage not in a negative sense, but in a positive sense. So I think from the two-year school's perspective, and as freshmen come to the four-year institution, we really need to look at how House Bill 5 has changed everything. And I think I'm the only one that's brought up House Bill 5 twice now in this conversation, but it really does change everything. And if you're not really deeply involved in House Bill 5 and the way the high schools are generating pathways into our two-year and four-year institutions, you really need to put that in perspective, because that's a freight train coming at us. And it's something that we don't want to have to revisit. We want to make sure that we understand what they're doing. And in terms of House Bill 5, probably the most important part of House Bill 5 is that students are not theoretically going to come to us in the way that they've come to us in the past. They're not going to need that whole notion of time to think about what they've committed to as much. They'll still need some, but not as much as they have in the past, because the high schools are really changing from the 4x4 to the House Bill 5 pathways, and those certifications, or whatever each high school calls them, those declarations, really mean that the students have had some principles of engineering, they've had some drafting, maybe they've had some design projects, they've touched on some of the engineering algorithm principles. They're not coming to us not knowing what the engineering algorithm is, necessarily. Now, there may be some that do, but in general, what House Bill 5 is really meant to do is it's meant to kind of flush some of that out so that it takes care of some of those concerns. And so what Jim and I have discussed is the fact that this field of study concept has to be taken into account from the perspective of the students that are entering this pathway as well as the students that are in the pathway. Second, it is a situation where we could have multiple fields of study for mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, etc. But it would be wonderful if we had a single field of study. And what a single field of study looks like is an interesting question. And what we're going to be talking about is the flexibility and putting the flexibility into the field of study so that it almost allows the student to do it in a way that the student would best benefit. In terms of transferability of courses and losing courses, I think that's an important guiding principle for us, but we have to recognize that the student takes a certain level of responsibility in this whole situation. And some of them may want to change from mechanical to electrical engineering, and so they are going to maybe lose some courses. Some of them may decide that they don't want to be a math major, they actually want to be an engineer. Maybe they'll lose some courses. But in the end, what we want to do is not harm any student. And if we take as the position that we're not going to harm any student, the voluntary compacts are good places to start to look at what we think a student in civil engineering or electrical engineering might need. Because those of you that were on the committees, you recognize that we started with the principles of what makes a civil engineer, what makes an electrical engineer. And then we went through ABET A through K and said, how does that work in these institutions? And I think that by virtue of doing that, we have a pretty good starting place to say a civil engineer in the state of Texas needs something like this. And so I would say that those voluntary compacts are not in some way flawed. They're simply a starting place. And I've used them with our students as a starting place to say, oh, gee, if you want to be an electrical engineer, this is the kind of stuff that you need to be thinking about. This is from the state of Texas. Now, as we get further down the process, if you want to transfer to UT Arlington, you want to transfer to UT Dallas, you want to transfer wherever, this is the kind of path you need to go down. And that decision-making process we really shouldn't take out of the hands of the student, in my opinion. In my opinion, we should guide the student and provide effectivity of pathways such that we don't put hurdles in the student's place as the student's going through the pipeline, and we allow them to make changes along the way if they want to, which may say that they're going to lose a few courses. But that's their choice. What we want to do is not harm them. We want to make sure that they're going to be successful as they go through this pathway in the 2-year and the 4-year institutions. So from the 2-year institution's perspective, I think what I'm seeking personally for my institution is the notion of flexibility that allows the student to have as much flexibility as they can as they choose their receiving institution. And I think that addresses a lot of the concerns around the table. If we can say, what are the lowest common denominators? What is a way that we can put a field of study out there that has the flexibility that each of us needs, and then move forward? We're probably effectively saying, gee, we're not going to harm a student. Right now in the field of study as interpreted by my institution, a student has to take statics, dynamics, and circuits 1 in order to get a field of study declaration. And of course, students don't do that, and that's harming a student, because that's encouraging a student to take a course that they may not need. Certainly for a mechanical electrical engineering, they may not need for the 4-year transfer institution that they're transferring to. And so I think that's been a real flaw in the field of study program, and I think that's what we're here to address. And I think the discussion started with the voluntary engineering compacts, but I don't think it ends there, because they're at 72 hours. They're, I think, guidance for us. And so as we think about this, I think we need to think about it in that context, because that allows the 4-year institution to maintain its fabric of curriculum, and it allows for partnerships, which I believe are one-to-one articulation agreements between institutions. I don't think that goes away. We tried to take it away in the voluntary engineering compacts. We couldn't take it away. We recognized that as part of the process, and in fact, we enhanced our articulation agreements with the field of the voluntary compact. So I think as we look forward with this, we shouldn't look at this as being in place of the articulation agreements or our partnerships with our large transfer institutions and your partnerships with 2-year institutions. What we should do is recognize, though, that the student coming into this pathway based on House Bill 5 is going to be a little bit more astute with respect to what they want to do. They may change their mind, but they're going to be a little bit more astute than the students that we've had in the past. And in addition to that, if we use the voluntary compacts as guidance, but not something that's law, and we recognize that what we're trying to do here is create something that's a law, that's a statute, that probably is the best context to have our discussion in.
Dan, you had a question, and then Roderick, and then after those two, lunch is ready, so let's reflect on our guiding principles, eat lunch, after we address these two questions. Dan?
All right, I want to address the idea that Dr. Nelson said, particularly number 1 and number 2, to offer the flexibility for students and maximize the number of credit hours. If we start with the concept that will help us define what makes an engineer, we will answer the question field of study of engineering. And I suggest that first 2 years should be focused on building an engineer, regardless of color. an engineer, like in medicine, a generalist physician, and then they specialize at the university level to become mechanical, electrical, civil, chemical, and so on and so forth, because we should define some body of knowledge that every engineer should have. And that kind of approach would simplify transfer, because the first 2 years we build an engineer, and most of them don't know what engineering is, and we force them to enter in electrical, and they find out, oops, but I hate electricity, I want mechanical or something. So because of that, our focus, I consider, will be beneficial for students. Make an engineer, regardless of what comes after. Make engineers, and that builds credibility into our focus to the profession that is a generalist. And then, based on the knowledge that I accumulate in the first 2 years, I can decide knowingly, I want to be a mechanical, I want to be electrical. And that's what happens when they move to the 4-year institution. They have a body of knowledge, and that's the chance they have to know about other fields. For example, how do you expect a student that is a mechanical engineer and goes out in industry working with electrical, with civil, and he has no idea what they are working on, what he can ask them to do? And that's what I noticed. I come from industry. I had students coming, graduates, and they didn't know. You are a mechanical, so what do you do in this project? And they don't know the details. They don't understand. And I consider that our goal should be prepare them the first 2 years with a generalist approach. I know what an electrical, I know of civil, and I know mechanical, materials engineering. For example, a lot of students need materials in every field of engineering, including civil, mechanical, and so on. They have no idea what kind of studies are done for materials. And that should be focused in the first 2 years. Learn about materials. Then I can specialize for mechanical. I can have steel, plastic, and so on. For electrical, I have copper and aluminum and other type of conductive materials and so on. Because that's where the body of knowledge should focus first 2 years. Generalist. I can fit wherever I decide later on, and that will simplify our transfer. Because if I make students that are engineers, period, engineers, they can fit at A&M, they can fit at UT, they can fit wherever. It's engineer. First 2 years should be focused on engineering, no color, no nothing. That will simplify the whole structure, because that's what I expect to define here. That's my take.
I think you hit the crux, very, very square again, Dan, as you often do. Roderick, you wanted to follow up?
No, I basically had to, when I spoke about joining this committee, there were 2 groups of people that made sure that I wrote their comments down, and I think this is the most appropriate place actually to offer them up as you're proposing the guiding principles. From my engineering faculty, the question is, and I think it goes very well into this, is maintaining the ability for them, that flexibility to innovate as they're delivering and teaching. Because one of the things that makes us, as engineers, in teaching that next generation of engineers, is that we have to maintain that flexibility our faculty have to really deliver the curriculum and innovate. And I think it also folds in very well with your 3rd guiding principle. So in doing so, I put their question out there, and it's guided, and so noted, and I'm not going to get yelled at. The second group was actually my academic advisors. And I cannot stress that the success of Richland's program has been at the at their ongoing efforts to advise the students on the most appropriate path. They are the front lines for us, because day in, day out, they're the ones that are putting the students in the coursework. And what they have continuously told me is a problem for them is not only the transparency of the information that it talks about these engineering disciplines, it is very difficult for them to figure this stuff out. So the one thing that I think that we have, as we're working through this, I think it's a voice that we necessarily did not have as we were going through the process. And as we began to implement this thing, it was a group that we did not necessarily target in their education of making sure that they understood all these disciplines. They understood what this transfer is. I've got maybe one or two people that are able to do that outside myself at my college. And trust me, we're touching something like 4,000 students that are interested in STEM. They remain very busy day in, day out. And the question they continue to ask me is, Roderick, how can we make this simpler? How can, not simpler in terms of the overall process, how can we make this information easier to give to the students so that as we're having them advised, as we're advising them, and sometimes to their own worst interest, as they advise themselves. We know a lot of students self-advise, which creates more of our problems. The more transparent the information is for them, the better we can make this process work. So that's
the only thing I'd add to the transparency is the availability. The students, especially the self-advisees, have to have the information available in an easy way to find, which goes back to the advising issue too. Victor, can we hold your question until after lunch? During lunch. Or during lunch, rather, I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break at this point. During that break, we'll address any fluid mechanics and environmental issues that have been forming over the course of the morning. Let's grab our lunch and our sandwich, and let's kind of reflect back on where we're going this afternoon. Then let's convene back in about 15 minutes, give or take a bit, and continue the discussions and work our way down. In coming down through this, I think in following up what Dave was saying about the flexibility and where we're coming through, Dan and a number of others have really talked about it too, and we've been going from 2-year, 4-year side as to what's being prepared. Think about, if you would, going into a mandated field of study for the certificate of what the content of that should be without adding anything in there that may or may not cross institutional boundaries. Bearing in mind, as Dave said very succinctly and Mary provided the information for, we've got the articulation compacts out there. They're voluntary. They are providing additional guidance on top of that. But for the purpose of the field of study, and going back to the issues of transparency and advising, for the field of study, what should the crux of that be? Let's come down through that issue. Then these other things begin to come in on top of it, and we can then roll out to some of the other questions. So at the beginning of our discussions after lunch then, I think let's come down to what are the essence of the things that absolutely should be contained within that field of study. If I can just propose a pathway as we go down that so we're not bouncing all over creation and drive Bart crazy, let us first address which is a very short trip for Bart. My father would say bus transfer isn't even required. What are friends for, Bart? Let us first talk about the math courses that should be contained within that, and let's think in terms of what math courses are the engineering disciplines going to require and what math courses may not be. Like, is Calculus 1, I'm going absurd here, but is Calculus 1 required by every baccalaureate engineering program in the state? If it's not, do we need it in the field of study? Now, that is easy, but I think the thrust. Then following that, let's go to the science courses that need to be contained within the field of study for the universal acceptability. And again, the universals we're going. And then the third piece is, let us look at, are there certain other core curriculum courses that every institution expects its engineers to have? I'm talking about the ones that will satisfy a curricular requirement as well as satisfy one of the state's 42-hour core curriculum requirements. And the fourth thing, if there's time today, and I think this is going to get beyond as we can begin the discussion on those first three, is we need to address the introduction to engineering issue a little bit, because that is really at the heart of a lot of the community college issues that begin to feed and begin to advise and guide students and the acceptability of this back and forth. But if we can we take them in that order? We'll look at the math courses first.
Physics.
Math, physics. Yeah, math first, then the science courses that we're on, physics specifically, and then we'll talk about the other core curriculum, and then...
1 second. Just 1 second. How many of you are familiar with Nathan Klingbeil from Wright University's concept of just-in-time math? That's very important, related to exactly what you said.
Okay.
That's why I want you to think about that.
But again, as we think about this, we got to be thinking about, I agree with what you're saying, Dan, but we got to think about the institutions accepting it in different pieces. But with that, let's take a break if we could for about 15 minutes, grab lunch. Okay, just a couple of things as we get ready to begin the discussion. One's just a curiosity point for me that, when Larry introduced himself, he mentioned that Mindy was left-handed, and I am too. How many folks, just out of curiosity, are left-handed?
Everybody in their right mind.
We're almost a quorum. That's interesting.
And the percentage just seems to be changing over time, too. It's just a curiosity point. No wonder you two multitask so effectively. Okay, with that, just one additional point of clarification, and we've been using some words a little bit loosely this morning in regard to the articulation compacts. And let me just go ahead and set the words straight a little bit on those compacts so we're using them correctly, and as we go forward with our discussions, we're not misconstruing an intention. Okay, the statewide, regardless of what's written on top of these sheets, and it's just we use phrases that we know what we mean, but they're suggesting incorrect things. Okay, the courses and things listed within the articulation compacts never were intended to be a curriculum or a program of study. Okay, neither is there. All that's being said with those courses, this is when the compacts all came into being, all that's being said is that a student who is interested in this field should consider taking these courses. And what is there is a list of consensus courses across the broad institution that have got the greatest chance at inclusion within a curriculum at an institution, but that is not universal. So it is only a recommended set of courses. It is not a curriculum that's owned by the faculty. It's not a program of study, because that's really a curriculum owned by the faculty. It's just a consensus set of courses. As I said earlier, just looking at UT Arlington and UT Tyler, because I know both of those civil engineering programs, surveying is one of the recommended courses for the civils, but even within the UT system, it's not going to be universally accepted. It may be applied at Arlington as a elective, but maybe not, because it's lower division. But that goes back to the fabric. And again, it's a set of suggested courses, and all we've agreed is that if we teach that course, 2-year or 4-year, we'll teach it to what is written within the ACGM so everybody knows what is coming in. That's the transparency that 2 or 3 of you have gone back to and mentioned. So when we look at the articulation compacts, let's just keep that in mind and not use it for something that is not there, was not intended in the beginning. Bart, you got a question, sir? Yes, to those documents say Community College Program of Study for Transfer to Biomedical Engineering. And really that program of study is students that go between the 4-year and 4-year. We've got a number of students that will transfer to A&M and UT Austin. And we're teaching the courses to that. They know what they're receiving, and by far and large, they're being accepted. Okay, with that then, let's continue down the pathway that we outlined before lunch. Let's bear in mind the guiding principles that we've got. It's going to be the flexibility and transferability for the students. It's going to be, let me just go back through and read them again.
As Jim gathers his notes, I'm just going to respond to a question that several of you have asked. Yes, more coffee is on the way.
And I am appalled at a meeting of engineers that, number one, we ran out, and number two, it tastes fresh. I mean, a good engineer puts tomorrow's coffee on at 5 o'clock today so it's cooked down to the proper consistency by 8 o'clock in the morning.
Sir, we'll try to do worse next time.
Thank you, ma'am. This is going to be a good group to work with. I'm looking forward to our time together. Okay, again, just the guiding principles we had were the flexibility for students to enable success, minimize the potential for lost credit hours, and enable the baccalaureate institution to maintain its curricular fabric in awarding its baccalaureate degree. Now, with that in mind, kind of following what Dan was saying about what are those root elements, and then we said we would do before we broke for lunch, let us look at the math courses first. Let us then look at the science courses, in particular the physics side of the house, second. And then let's look at the true core curricular course, the mandated core curricular course that should be included third in that line. And what I would like to do, just so we truly hear all voices, is let's just proceed around the room with the math courses that we think should be contained within the field of study and why. April, hang on 1 second. And what should be contained within that and why. And again, we don't need to keep repeating the exact same thing over and over again. If we agree with what has already been said, let's just identify that and move on. And then April, question before we get started?
Yeah, just a quick question. Did you skip the engineering basics? Because you said math,
We're
and then
going
you
to
said
go
physics.
math first, then we're going to go to sciences, then it'll come in third.
Did you mean, so when you said core, you meant like engineering core, not like history core?
No, I meant the history core and that pieces, then we'll get into the other engineering core that'll be there after that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's there. It's just trying to break the pieces apart. We're still going to be a little cognizant of that core curriculum because of this 42-hour core because that, well, we got to do it. But there can be some of the engineering courses that take advantage of that, so let's see where that falls out. Then we'll get into the other engineering core, which would come in on top of all that and begin to build over that base. Okay, with that, Forrest, if we can just begin with you as to the math courses that you think should be contained within a field of study that all engineers would take and should take, in your opinion. Excuse me, as we go through this, bear in mind, too, that if a different discipline does not require a course, let's be sure to get that on the table.
Are you speaking of just add a 2-year, or are you talking about all of engineering?
I'm talking about the first 2 years, because that's going to be the field of studies, the first 2 years to get the student ready for the upper division study when they transfer. Forrest, do you want to begin? We'll just go around the room in that direction.
Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, and differential equations.
Okay.
Eventually you're going to need them, that's true, but I think that maybe Calculus 1 through Calculus 3, personally. Differential equations, I mean, I teach stuff where we have to use differential equations, but I do it as an add point kind of a thing. I teach it when I'm using it. So I think Cal 1 through Cal 3.
I'd like to chime in here because we've done an analysis of what is in calculus.
Could we hold that discussion? Let's just go around the room and get everybody's views.
But it's important to this discussion of calculus 1, 2, and 3 because you haven't defined the content of 1, 2, and 3. And we went and did an analysis of a number of different universities because we're looking at our curriculum. And 1, 2, and 3 isn't the same at each institution that we looked at. So it's a generic placeholder for 3 semesters of calculus and differential equations. I think this is what you're saying.
The 4 I gave, Calc 1, 2, 3, and differential equations would be as described in the academic course guide manual. Or the transfer compact, the objectives that we covered in the transfer compact. If you want, I mean, I can give you the academic course guide manual course numbers if that would be more specific.
I think, let me just clarify just a minute. One of the advantages for the transfer compacts was that the universities that signed on to those compacts agreed to teach the course with the same learning objectives at a minimum as what was in the academic course guide manual. The difficult issue is that the universities don't have to adhere to the academic course guide manual. So that was one of the advantages of the compact. When you really, I can get the exact language, but that was the idea, that the way that it's described in the academic course guide manual is the way that it would be taught, even at the universities that signed the compact. So that's one thing I think that probably we're going to need to get you a copy. For those of you who do not have your laptops, the academic course guide manual is on your flash drives. And for professors that are not used to the academic course guide manual, we're going to need to probably pull up the academic course guide manual on the screen or give you a full copy. The only thing is that it's several hundred pages, so it's got. Okay, so let me pull it up, and then you do okay. Good. On your flash drive, underneath reference materials, there is the academic course guide manual. But that is an issue that will probably need to be addressed, because I've been hearing that even through the compacts, that if the university doesn't teach it to the academic course guide manual as it's specified, then the community colleges really are not transferring the students. And that was one of the big things with the work of these committees, is to align the courses so that a particular theorem was taught in Calculus 1, and that was agreed to with that committee. So I'm going to pull it up just to show you. Okay.
John, just going back for the information of those who weren't a part of that process, when we started this back in 2009, the issue that you raised is what almost caused the entire process to become totally derailed to the detriment of the students. Then going through those discussions was interesting was Butch Hayes was the provost at TJC, and he was sitting next to me in a good part of those meetings. And as folks around the room started talking about their content of a particular course, I cannot tell you the number of times that I leaned over to Butch, or Butch leaned over to me, and we said, what course are we talking about? We don't recognize it anymore. And to get past that, when these subject matter expert groups came together to begin to address what should be the content of a course, what should be the student learning outcomes for lower division only, and it was only 2,000 level down that was addressed. What was looked at was from the 2-year side of the house, from the 4-year side of the house, given all the course syllabi that were solicited from across the state, what are the common elements of the catalog description, what are the non-common elements on both the 2-year and the 4-year side, and that was consolidated across, and of the stated student learning outcomes, what were those elements? There were a number of courses that there was virtually nothing in the common side, it was all in the uncommon side, and this is part of the problem we had with preparedness that came in. The students would take a course, but things at a different institution are addressed in a different spot. So, and coming through that work with that coherent catalog description, and again, that was very important because in the calculus sequence, as I recall, in the academic course guide manual at that point, the calculus courses were all lumped together with a one-sentence description that applied to all 3 calculus courses as to what's there, and that description was so vague, I'm being a little sarcastic, but unfortunately not much. You could teach anything from pre-medieval basket weaving to astrophysics, and it fully satisfy the stated content of Calculus 2. And that was a huge problem. So what's coming out of that work in 2009 was the first time that the catalog description on a course-by-course basis, not on a grouping of courses, was stated, and student learning outcomes were added to the academic course guide manual. And that was agreed to. The work of that committee was presented to the academic course guide manual committee, and they deliberated over the course of about 6 months on that and agreed to bring that in. So beginning at that point, the student learning outcomes and the catalog description were there, so that from the 2-year sides addressed, they have to live by that. We should be too. But with that, let's continue on.
Sorry, Jim. So I think probably for the sake of notes, probably need to qualify it. Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3.
Yeah.
Those definitions are those that are defined through the academic course guide.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Yeah.
Very precise.
Yeah, the courses that we discuss in here are those courses contained within the academic course guide manual for which there are the stated catalog descriptions and student learning outcomes, which is about everything that we're talking about, as I recall.
And just to clarify, that's what I was referring to when I was talking about the math courses. We actually list the ACGM outcomes in our math in our courses, so they're there. The problem we're finding, of course, is when you start limiting yourself to 60 hours, something's got to go somewhere, and so that's how it goes.
Let's not worry about the 60 hours at this point. We're in an ideal world.
Okay.
We have no constraints. What is it we want to bring in, and if we end up going too high, then we'll debate the issue and get it through. But the objective is we want to do this for the student. We want to start putting out well-qualified engineers. So with that, what courses do you think, math courses, should be contained within the field of study, as stated in the ACGM?
Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3.
Okay, why do you feel differential equations can be dropped?
Well, from differential equations perspective, first of all, what I've been teaching in terms of chemical engineering, that gets really deep into control theory, and that is not that's not a first 2-year subject. Okay, so when we do come across it, then what I do is I teach it at that point. So it's just at the moment ad hoc kind of discussion. And by the way, frankly, that works a lot better for the students than having a body of knowledge which is in the past and they're having to try to remember from. We were talking about point of use teaching. That's kind of like what that is.
Larry?
I would also state we consider differential equations to be a junior level course at Texas A&M Kingsville, so I would say Calculus 1, 2, and 3. And by the way, your USB things, you pull it this way to open up. I almost broke it. So, okay, that's all I have.
Okay. I thought a bunch of engineers could do that.
By observation.
Rachel?
I would say Calculus 1, 2, 3. But here I have a question. Since the field of study is supposed to be accepted by the receiving institution as a whole, so how about if the 4-year school, they have a different course name? For example, they do not call this course Calculus 3. They will call it Calculus 3 and differential equation, whatever they want to call. But for 2-year schools, we do use all the ACGM course numbering and name and learning outcomes. How do we address this issue? Will this be a potential loss of credit hour problem?
No, each 4-year institution is supposed to have a crosswalk back to the ACGM numbering for its courses, and it's supposed to be contained within our catalogs. But I mean, you point out something that's very valid. It's that course numbering. In the 4-year are not bound by the same constraints as the 2-year. Part of this is good, part of this is bad. But this is one of the things that's bad is, we do our numbers A&M. I believe you're still on 3-digit course numbers, aren't you?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. As opposed to 4-digit. Okay, within the system, and I mean, we got the same issue within the UT system. That's all you got to do. The course numbers don't match, but each institution has to have a crosswalk of its course numbers to the ACGM. But I know it's confusing for the student.
Well, we had this issue before.
Yeah. Okay.
They'll come back to us that, or this course is not in our degree plan. So we do not require this course.
But again, it goes back to, of the ACGM courses, what should be contained within it. And then we have to get to 4-year to begin to identify that other piece. But so you're saying Calc 1, 2, and 3?
No, I'm just using this as an example.
But I'm sorry, but what courses do you think should be contained within the
Calculus 1, 2, 3.
Calc 1, 2, and 3. By Calculus 3, you mean multivariate?
No, I was just using that as an example.
Okay, but when you say Calculus 1, Calculus 2, and Calculus 3...
Should be included.
Okay, but Calculus 3 is multivariate calculus in your definition of Calculus 3, correct?
No, I am using that as an example for, actually, I want to talk about engineering courses because some of the engineering courses at 4-year schools, they do not use the same course name.
Yeah, okay, separate. But again, Okay. My question is for understanding. Okay, you said Calculus 1, Calculus 2, and Calculus 3 should be included in the field of study.
Yes.
Okay, when you say Calculus 3, you mean multivariate calculus, right? For the Calculus 3 course?
I mean the Calculus 3 in the ACGM.
Okay, which is the multivariate, okay. Okay.
So it'll be Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3.
Okay. Martin?
Ideally through differential equations, calculating for differential equations, with
I'm not
a smidgen of linear algebra.
I'm using this.
Okay. Denise? Mike, please.
Cal 1, 2, probably 3, and definitely DE.
And definitely DE.
Cal 1 to 3 and differentials.
I also said calculus 1 through 3 and DiffyQ.
Okay. Dan?
I have to take consensus and say calculus 1, 2, and 3 plus differential equations, but not completely, because I was attracted by the idea of this gentleman, a professor, doctor at Wright University, Dr. Nathan Klingbeil. And he came up with the concept that is really amazing, just-in-time math. And he boosted the enrollment in engineering tremendously. I really suggest that you should do a search online, Nathan Klingbeil, and see the papers that he published and so on and so forth. And that's amazing, because a lot of students get pushed away from engineering because of prerequisite of calculus. But if you teach math enough to get them into statics and dynamics, and then allow for another higher level math and so on, you have them exposed to math gradually. And also they can get into engineering courses, because I want to say this in all honesty, I never ever in 30 years of engineering practice outside of school, never ever used any calculus. So that's why we are pushing this, and we lose students.
Okay, let's...
So I would say, yeah, I go along with everybody, calculus 1, 2, and 3, but I don't believe in it. That's it. Yes, I say, I go along.
Did you say, I thought you included differential equations the first time?
Yes, also. Because they are, for electrical engineers, they are needed.
All four. Okay, Eddie, all four. Roderick?
I agree with all those, but I would also look to add something that deals as well with matrix and linear algebra, because that seems to be earlier than that. Yeah, well, in all disciplines, I mean, systems of linear equations, so I mean...
Yeah, but you're looking at the lower level.
Yes.
Only 2 years.
Statics dynamics deals systems of linear equations. So...
Hey, Terry?
I finally do have consensus on our campus that we're taking 1, 2, 3 and differential equations, but I have to add a caveat. We only take differential equations when our math department, the domain experts, approve it, not our engineering departments. So I'm a little worried about going down this path without having math departmental input.
Okay, April?
1 through 3 DiffyQ.
Okay. Shield?
Microphone. We take a Cal 3 as a transfer to a class we create locally we call Engineering Application for Mathematics. So the hour is different, but we accept it.
But from the field of study, all four?
We did not cover entire Calculus 3. We only pick up a partial material from Cal 3.
For the field of study, your recommendation is Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, and DiffyQ?
No.
Cal 1, Cal 2, and the differential equation for first 2 years.
Okay, but not Cal 3. Okay.
Not Cal 3.
I'd have to go with Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, but like these guys over here, because differential equations is normally a junior in just about every 4-year university. It makes it hard, and we can't take out the 60 hours. I don't care if you say we can, and we're not worried about it. We have to think about how many courses we can possibly get these kids through. And remember, we're thinking of them. So the answer is that Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3 works well at a 2-year college, and we can get them through that. We just can't get them through the
Victor?
Not Cal 3. The others.
Bart?
Okay, so in my role as scribe here,
well, give us your opinion first.
I just need to make sure that I'm recording this. So I'm hearing people say Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3. I'm hearing people say Cal 1, Cal 2, probably Cal 3, and not Cal 3. Is that accurate? Right. I'm hearing some people say differential equations.
Right.
Yes. I'm hearing some people say differential equations. No, because it's a junior level course. Did I miss anything? This is kind of multivariate analysis here. I'm hearing people say some linear algebra are linear algebra as part of this or not part of this. So I just that was.
You only heard
clear.
it once.
I only heard it once.
All right.
Twice.
And then I've heard the math courses. Some math departments need to reflect and approve differential equations or some other courses. Is that right? So a number of variations. So speaking for Houston Community College, which is why you have me here.
ACGM.
Right. This is all by ACGM. Right. Correct. So the notation on this is a math course assessment contained within the ACGM, and that we're looking at an ideal case, not looking at the 60 hours, 72 hours, whatever it happens to be. So with respect to Houston Community College, it's Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, differential equations.
John?
Okay, for the University of Texas, coming prepared, knowing what's in these ACGMs, I'm going to say Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, and differential equations, with the footnote that what we define as those are what's in ACGM.
Okay.
Cal 1, Cal 2, and Cal 3. And again, differential equations, it depends on the institution that they will transfer to.
Okay. Given what we've just heard, I think everybody's in complete agreement on Calculus 1 and Calculus 2. The majority in the room is spoken up for differential equations. A fairly small minority, everybody's agreed to Cal 1, Cal 2. A vast majority in the room has agreed that Cal 3 should be in there. Almost the same majority, but less, has agreed that differential equations should be in there. There were a small minority that didn't think Cal 3 should be in there, but one of those two had DiffEq. And there's been a little bit for the linear algebra, matrix algebra. Now, just one point on the discrete math and the linear algebra and those pieces coming through, going back to the work of the Tuning Council, there were very few programs that were using that. Those courses were tuned, but very few programs were using those courses and expecting them to transfer credit. That's just information that's out there. Now, given this outcome, okay, let's break this discussion into a pair of pieces now. Okay, and again, keeping this democratic and so Bart can be recording, we throw things out. Is there a motion that we include Cal 1 and Cal 2 as defined in the ACGM as a part of the field of study? Okay, April moved. Connie seconded. Okay, is there any other discussion on those two courses?
I have the exact same issue that John has, quite frankly, that we do not teach it in the same order. And this is going to be an issue for us.
Okay. The course content between what A&M and Austin are doing.
Well, let me say that currently, you can take 4 credit Calculus 1 and Calculus 2, or you can take 3 semester calculus sequence, that's 9 credits. And we're trying to harmonize all these. And in the process of doing this and negotiating with the math department, which isn't done yet, I don't know how that lands on top of what's being proposed, what's in these courses. We didn't look at these, we looked at other universities. And maybe the study group did look at this. I hope they did, but I can't say they did. So I'm getting the look over here. So this is the only reason this is the qualification on this. I think what you have in here is probably what we have, but I can't verify that. I didn't come prepared to take a vote on this today because I didn't know I had to have this information.
Is this a democracy? That's my other question. Honestly. Are we really just going to do majority rules?
Well, no, we have to come to consensus on.
Consensus is not a democracy.
I agree. We've got to come to consensus on what is here. Roderick, you're going to make a comment?
Yeah, and I think it's bearing on this. As we talk, we're talking specifically about these courses, and we look at it toward the universities, Calc 1, 2, and, we talk about these calculus sequences. I can pick an example of a receiving institution where their calculus sequence is accelerated. So they teach in 2 semesters what we teach in 3 semesters. So all the students that are going to take it, they have to take all 3 courses in order to receive credit, period. And if they try to transfer before that, they're out of sequence. So I don't know if we can at this moment, given, and I'm looking at this peering toward the senior institution, because for me it's already defined now. I mean, it was really great work and in the ACGM. So everyone on our end, we know what we're talking about when we talk about Calc 1 through 3. But as we're still having to navigate those waters as that goes on to the senior institutions. So we may be a little bit ahead of ourselves because we still might miss the mark if we say Calc 1 and 2 only in an institution where as it's teaching accelerated or their math department is not there. I don't think we're going to get. I think right now we're not going to get what we're looking for at this moment. I think there's a lot more divergence than we think than is sitting in this room, because I can name at least 5 people that aren't here in terms of universities that could make the same point.
So I'd like to offer a suggestion, and that means homework on my part. But I think we need to. It's important for me as representing a 4-year institution to understand what we're proposing for engineering and how that maps into these numbers here. And the content that's being proposed for those courses, because that's indeed what happens. The students come in, and then you make them take a course, and they've essentially say, well, I've had all this, but you didn't have 2 weeks of something, so now you have to take another course. And we're trying to harmonize all of this, but let's make sure we're doing this. And so maybe A&M has to do the same thing. And then I think it's more appropriate. I agree that we're going to land on something, but it may be premature.
And I came in with the whole list of our courses and which programs require them and which don't. Like, I'm sitting here looking, our engineering technology only requires Calc 1, Calc 2. I mean, I've got a whole list. But what I don't have is the content specific right here in front of me. But I do know, just like Roderick just said, if we have students who want to go away and take a part of the calc sequence, we have issues. We like our students to complete the calc sequence, quite frankly, at their 2-year institution. We encourage that. And it's because of this mismatch. So I can find out what it is and have the details, but I agree I do not have it with me today.
April?
Would we address the issues? And I know some people say we don't necessarily need Cal 3, but if we're just looking at a body of knowledge, like the difference between do I take Physics 1 or Physics 1 and 2, that we look at the sequence and and instead of saying, well, we all agree for sure, we're going to put Cal 1 through 3 on here, we'll say, okay, we think we're going to take Cal 1 through 3 and kind of, are you trying to get a working document? What you're saying right now is you're not trying to get our stamp of approval, like, this is for sure what we're going to do. You're just going to try to put something together and then we go home and think about it.
Together, yeah.
Okay. So could we put Cal 1 through 3 as a suggestion?
Let's try to break things into pieces, because there seemed to be complete agreement on Cal 1, Cal 2. We started to float after that. So that's why I was trying to break it into pieces. We're going to take the Cal 3 next and then the differential equations.
I guess what I'm saying is I totally understand her concern is they're looking at the full sequence. So even though some people, if we were to say Cal 1 through 3, would everybody in here be okay with that, at least temporarily, with the idea that this would help make it the most applicable going across, even though individual institutions, because I don't think we have agreement on just Cal 1 and 2, but I think we might get better between 1 through 3?
No, I think we did have agreement on Cal 1 and Cal 2. Cal 3 started to vary, and we got to look at institutionally where these differences begin to come in. Okay, Lawrence, you got to...
There we go. My comment's actually very similar to the discussion that's been going on, and I think it matches with that, in that I think we need to form a proposal for what we would want to put together. I think that's what you're up to.
Yeah. Right.
And I certainly am not in a position to comment exactly on the specifics. I have to read that stuff and also compare with our specific course requirements for all of our specialties before I could actually...
But if we were to take as an action item out of this meeting the notion that everyone would go back to their institution and pull specific syllabi for specific Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3 differential equations courses and understand how they stack up against the ACGM, that's probably a pretty good action item out of it.
I think that'd be perfect. Yeah.
So the thought process is we're trying to generate enough action items so that we have some actions that we can complete before we get together again. And the challenge that's out there is that while the ACGM learning outcomes are individual learning outcomes and should be cross-state learning outcomes, you do have the opportunity to, after those learning objectives, add a bunch of learning objectives if you would like to for your institution. And I think that's probably where the divergence comes. I don't think anybody's necessarily violating the ACGM, but I think there may be institutions that are adding learning objectives. Certainly, one of our major transfer institutions adds some learning objectives. They still take our courses, but they take them with the caveat that the student hasn't had a couple of these extra learning objectives.
One thing that is, hang on a second, Bert. One thing that is in there, which we've got to bear in mind, for this, and again, there's 2 institutions in the room that have not signed, but all other institutions that signed the Voluntary Articulation Compact, one of the things that is contained within that, and the intention was to move this forward, and I know A&M and Austin have not signed, we just need to recognize that. But those that have signed it, coming down into it, item number 1, and this is 2-year and 4-year, item number 1 says course offerings. When offering any or all of the mathematics, engineering, and science courses specifically listed in Annex A, signatory institutions will offer the course or courses consistent with the indicated descriptions and the student learning outcomes as listed in the Academic Course Guide Manual. So whether UT Tyler or Richland or Texas State or Tarrant County is teaching that course, and those are all signatories, I know for certain. We've agreed to teach to that so that we all know what's coming out the door at the other end for transfer. So we've agreed to that, with the exception of Austin and Texas A&M.
But we haven't agreed not to add extra learning objectives.
Yeah, and that goes back to the learning objective can be added to the course. That is the minimum of what is contained within it.
That's correct. And so some of the diversity between institutions may well have to do with the addition of learning objectives.
No, it can't. It can't, because it says the transfer. That goes back into paragraph 3. This we need to be very careful. Paragraph 3 says students who successfully complete courses shown in Annex A will be able to transfer the course credit hours to a signatory 4-year institution upon successful admission to the institution. So they got to be admitted. If the courses completed are part of the degree program to which the student has been admitted. Again, this is going back to as stated, the institution will apply those courses as satisfaction of program requirements.
Absolutely.
So, that's what we've agreed to.
In terms of transfer, that's fine. Yeah. What I'm saying is when we talk about diversity between institutions, they may take those courses. We have a situation with a transfer institution when the transfer institution takes the course. That's not an issue. So this is fine. What I'm saying is that in their actual execution and teaching of the course, they have 2 additional learning objectives that are outside and beyond the ACGM. They take the course from us, no problem. But there are two different learning objectives, and so if someone's looking at the diversity throughout the state, one may be talking about those additional learning objectives beyond the ACGM.
But I think the question comes in where that becomes a problem on the four-year side if they're doing that is if that student takes the course from Dan out at Kilgore and decides to go to whichever, I'm assuming you're talking about a Dallas institution, to go to that same Dallas institution, Dan would not be teaching those additional outcomes you've got there.
Right. But that's right, but that wouldn't affect the transfer.
They'll still take the course and apply it to the curriculum?
Yep. So I guess what I'm saying is if you look at all the syllabi and you start looking at diversity, the diversity that you see may or may not be associated with them adhering to the ACGM. They may well adhere to the ACGM, but they may have other objectives beyond that.
Whether the mix and match.
But if that other objective is expected as part of that course before they accept it, are they adhering to the ACGM?
My point is they're simply accepting the course and the transfer. They're accepting the ACGM.
Can I make a suggestion? Can we go, whatever part I played in derailing it, I apologize. Can we go down the path that you had of creating, and let's call it a straw man, of creating a straw man that gives us the courses and the content and the expectations that we need to go and do our due diligence on. And then that way we can all come back together prepared. So I like the idea of what might be in, what might be out, right? So that, and I shouldn't even use the word straw man. I just think we should create a short list of classes or content and say that's where we need to go do our homework.
But I agree, and that's where we're going. But I do believe that we need to do it within the context of what the signatory institutions have agreed to, and then we've got you two sitting there. Yeah, but if we do that within the context, otherwise what we've done is we've invalidated everything that's ever been done. We're going back to ground zero and starting over, which is not the intention of the field of study. Okay, so Victor, relevant to this, or?
I think so.
Okay.
When these compacts were signed, every four-year university is continually looking at their degree plans and making modifications. And one of the things that the legislature or we felt pressure on was to reduce the number of credit hours in each engineering degree, getting closer and closer to the 120 magic number. In doing so, some of the content in Cal 3 was moved into Cal 2. So what I'm saying is there are universities who have signed the compact, but that's are no longer in compliance with the compact.
Which begs the other question then when this is...
Can I make a comment on that?
Hang on one second.
Okay, then maybe I can...
Yeah, but this does beg the question that when these changes occur, should there not be a parallel recommendation to the Academic Course Guide Manual Committee to change the Academic Course Guide Manual to reflect this so that we don't begin to diverge all over creation? Okay, Larry,
what I was going to recommend here is I think the content with the Calculus 1, 2, 3, as it is in the ACG, is why don't we just say, okay, do we agree to the content in that, and however we split it up, because I dealt with both A&M and with UT and Austin, and they may split it up in different forms, but I think we can agree on the content in Calculus 1, 2, and 3, or at least in Calculus 1 and 2. But if we say, okay, we agree to the content in those, and maybe different schools slice it differently, but we have a body of knowledge in those three, and if we slice it, I think we can all agree on that with the content there.
But let me just ask a question. Go ahead. John. Just a point.
That's all I had.
Yeah, just a point on that. And again, it's a procedural question. If we follow that pathway and say, okay, we agree on the content of Cal 1 and Cal 2 and smash those two together, can, as part of the field of study, say that these two courses must be taken at the same institution?
I think at this point anything could be discussed, and almost I think as this, I guess Terry said, I think that take it together, take it as a group, take it as a package. I think that might be an appropriate footnote that we could certainly discuss at this point. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
I think yes, that would be something that we would certainly entertain. I don't know of anything that would cause a problem with that, and that seems like good student advising to me, because I think we know that the longer students stay away from math, the further they digress.
Can take Cal 1 at one place and Cal 2 at the other place. Okay, so with that, let's go down that.
I'm sorry, I'm always confused, but I'm more confused about 2 points. One is if we say the ACGM, Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, however we come down on this, as that this is the core, then does that mean, according to some Senate bill or House bill or some bill, does that mean that every campus that's publicly supported has to offer those courses? Is that what this leads to?
No, in the sense of the accelerated calculus series, no. So in other words, right now there's accelerated calculus 1, accelerated calculus 2, which is supposed to be equivalent to Cal 1, Cal 2, and Cal 3. So in that sense, those would be equivalent.
Okay, but you have to offer. So if we said I'll just use the example, you could have a year's worth of calculus in 2 semesters, or you can have a year's worth of calculus spread over 3 semesters, right? You could do it that way. And you lose a few things and you cram a few things in here. Now, if this committee or this study group comes up and says there should be these 3 courses, does that mean campuses that have 2 courses now have to have 3 courses? Because people people transferring in after they've had 1 or 2 of those courses, they have to repeat things, and so this gets in the way of the transfers. I'm only bringing this up as a point. So,
yeah, John, that goes back to the question that I asked procedurally: can we put a footnote in that these should be taken at the same institution?
Okay. Right.
Okay. Now, we're coming down to what we're beginning to evolve down here to is we can contain nothing in the field of study because we all can't agree that we want to take things. And I think what's got to be remembered around the table is there's, from the 4-year side of the house, I think what we need to, what all the 4-year institutions sitting around the table need to remember is that all 4-year institutions are not the same in regard to where the students, or from where the students come. That there are some institutions that are sitting here that are highly dependent upon transfer students coming in. Close to 80% of some of the institutions' students are transfer students coming in after that. Other institutions around the table have got a relatively very small number of transfer students that come in. So the needs vary among institutions. As we bring this field of study together, we've got to recognize this diversity of need and try and come down with something that is going to be acceptable to all of us as it comes in.
In your packet, you have the actual statute, and paragraph B says if a student successfully completes a field of study curriculum, and that means really the community college side of it, and the community colleges have to teach the ACGM courses. And then paragraph C, and I'm not going to do the whole thing, it goes in and says if they complete the whole field of study, the whole field of study replaces or counts for the lower division sequence of courses. And so what that allows flexibility for is you could have your own numbering system, and you could potentially do 2 courses. You could have a year of calculus, however you had it in your degree potentially. But what you've got to do is if it's decided that it's the 3 courses and this is the way it works, and that's equal to what you do, then yes. Now, paragraph C starts saying if a student doesn't complete but he transfers, then you've still got to find a way to accommodate. But then if a student only does one of the maths, and community colleges are doing maths in thirds, hypothetically, and universities are doing maths in halves, that's going to have to be dealt with, and the student is probably going to have to somehow or another back up a little bit.
But I think the key is what you said is the student completes the field of study, which gets us past some of these issues that are being talked about.
Right.
Roderick and then Dan.
I want to hopefully help and not hurt this process, because I would say to all that had not participated in any of the tuning committees that as far as meetings go, we're off to a pretty good start, because the first meeting is where most of the bloodletting happens anyway. So as far as that goes, this is not so bad. Second, I wanted to, as we talk about this, the ACGM, and I've become keenly aware of this, that many of the four-year institutions are not as familiar with the ACGM as the two-year institutions are, because and I want to make something clear, the ACGM, as it states, is the grail in terms of how we're required to offer courses. Anything that goes into this manual, we are required to teach, which means that, and this is part of the notes that my faculty were given me to tell so I don't get beat up, is that arbitrary changes in the ACGM are not looked upon well by them either. It reduces their flexibility. And I think that is, even as a guiding principle, we want this flexibility. We know that as we worked our way through this and got to the learning outcomes, that was a great thing. But one of the things that in arbitrarily changing those learning outcomes, let's say combining things from Calc 1 to Calc 2 arbitrarily, messes up the entire world for us as well. So we want to be very mindful of that we cannot go in and just superficially make changes to that without a chorus of input, because that was one of the things that we learned from the mechanical engineering process when we went in and touched the sciences without asking them, and they really brought out the clubs for us. I think, as we said, I think the most prudent course would be to allow everyone to get their due diligence done, and I think that will smooth this conversation, because if we're talking from a place where we're not sure, we don't want to make lasting promises on the part of our institution. I certainly don't want to do things that are going to hinder and affect the ability for my students to transfer successfully. That's my number one goal. That's part of our guiding principle.
Dan, then Mary.
We are trying to define the field of study of engineering. Why not put calculus as a whole with the topics that we consider vital for engineering? And then some schools have it split in Calculus 1, Calculus 2. Other schools have Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3. But as long as they cover the topics that we consider that are important or vital for engineering, should be enough. That's why Calculus 1, Calculus 2, differential equations, all these are different courses that are offered by schools in different contexts. But if we define calculus, that's the body of knowledge that we need for the engineering field, that will be pretty much covering any way we split them. That's
Dan, my only fear in that, and I was kind of watching Shield when I was going to ask you, I think by doing that, we've created a transfer advising nightmare coming down through, and Dan's saying, Mary, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a real quick point of clarification. The academic course guide manual are the courses that a community or technical college can teach on the academic side and get reimbursed for the course by the state. So there's two of them. There's the academic course guide manual, and then there's the workforce education manual, or WECM, that everybody talks about. And that, just a quick point of clarification, it's not like every course in the academic course guide manual must be taught by a community college. Rather, it's that the community college can, in order to get funding, those are the courses that they can teach on the academic side in order to get funding from the state. So just a quick point of clarification on that.
Dan?
Kim, I was just going to say, I think we're going to be sitting here on action items is all we're going to get. Because if you go around the room, we've got the two-year colleges are talking a little bit differently than the four-year colleges, because in our minds, the ACGM, we don't have a choice in the two-year college. No choice at all. So everything we look at, and that's why I said the hours again too, everything we look at has to be ACGM. Now, what we need to have, everybody has to have the knowledge here of not what it's called, what it is. What it is. And that's kind of back to Dan, too. What are we teaching in these courses? We're not going to reinvent them. That's not our job. It's not on the charter. What our job is to do is to know what's being taught in those courses. So when we say Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, what we mean is those things being taught up there on the board, we're okay with that. And then the 4-year colleges, we're hoping from the 2-year side, say, sure, yeah, you guys teach it. You're not letting your history professor teach it, then we're okay with it. Or the coach. Had problems with that at Kilgore. But anyway, it's that's what we're kind of looking at to do. We're laughing here a little bit just because we're only into math. We haven't even got to the engineering yet, and that's where the bloodletting is going to happen because we really do. But we don't have a choice on the 2 years, so I apologize for the 4 year because we don't. We have to go with what's up here, and that's what we're going to teach. So.
Okay, let's change our.
I need to bring this up is the field of study. For if we include 6 or 7 courses, a student has to complete all of those before this can be transferred, accepted, right? It's not course by course transfer. They have to complete.
If they've signed the articulation compact and have completed those courses, it can go course by course. But for the student to get the field of study certificate, they must complete the whole field of study.
Right. So for us to discuss what's going to be included in the field of study, for example, the Calculus 1, 2, 3, we will not have those kind of situation. A student finished Calculus 1 at one school and trying to take Calculus 2 at another school.
If they complete the field of study. Yeah. Okay, Fraction.
In this discussion, we're missing a main point here, which is student success. What is our goal in trying to develop these articulation agreements? Is it to ensure that we are just transferring courses, or are they going to succeed in the program they're going into? I think in the end of the day, the latter should be more important. What we are trying to do is, in the early stages, is we are going to stick to the letter of the law, which will require us to accept transfers. However, in order to address the issue of success, we can address it from the point of view of establishing competencies that students have to have. If those competencies are met or they're not met, then the students have to achieve those competencies to move through the program. In a sense, not 100% of the competencies, but let's say you have 60% of a score required to move forward, then you have to achieve 60% of those competencies. It's a big challenge to do that, but nonetheless, I think the common problem we face, we get 70% of our students are transfer students. So we survive based on transfer students in our program. However, we do lose a lot of these students because they don't have the competencies to succeed in the future courses.
Let me address.
This is the right avenue to discuss this at a later point.
It is, but there's another point actually 2 points that need to come in, and let me just get these on the table so we're aware of everything with which we're dealing. And then we make a proposal for proceeding forward, given where we're sitting right now in the discussion. Okay, one of the other things, and again, for everybody who's a signatory to the articulation compacts, the voluntary compacts is number 4 is the assessment. And that goes back to what you're saying, that the signatory institutions will assess the effectiveness of the transfer compact periodic basis, and that is literally being done. The coordinating board is pulling the data together for that. So the demonstrated achievement of the competencies is there. What has been decided, there was a separate committee that had been set up and said that its success in the follow-on course is going to be the indicator that the institution has achieved the program learning outcomes in the prior course. That is being done. Those reports will go out, and any institution that is not succeeding in that is going to get a little note from Daddy saying, come on and let's chat. How are you going to fix where you appear to be deficient? So, but again, the signatory institutions fall into that. Another thing that Mary just passed to me here, and let me read this for a moment, and then we'll have perhaps a potential plan of study or a plan of moving ahead here. It says, C, a student who transfers from one institution of higher education to another without completing the field of study curriculum of the sending institution shall receive academic credit in the field of study curriculum of the receiving institution for each of the courses that the student has successfully completed in the field of study curriculum at the sending institution. So that begins to, it's swirling that we're talking about. Yeah. So, yeah.
The next sentence there goes on.
Okay. It says, following receipt of credit for these courses, the student may be required to satisfy the remaining course requirements in the field of study curriculum of the receiving institution or to complete additional requirements. Yeah. Okay, so with where we sit right now.
Sorry, I thought I had understandings of where you were going, but I mean, really, I mean, the topic that you're talking about is you're linking transfer compact assessment to the field of study.
No. Two separate things. Just hang on for 1 second. I think we're going to get there. No, this was just because we're talking about is the content received, and it's going back to the issue that Prakash raised about making sure the student's qualified, and that assessment is going on. So that issue should come off the table. Now, going forward, I think this will clarify what you're asking. If it doesn't, let's come back to it in a second. Okay, moving forward. Okay, given that we're 25 minutes at 2, and given the time remaining, we're not going to get wrapped up, and I would like to get us all out of here by 2 o'clock, given the weather, and nobody's stuck their head out the window. It's looking yucky. And that's engineering talk for miserable. Okay, for the action item that we all take away from this meeting, is everybody will, number 1, dig up a copy of the academic course guide manual.
It's on your flash drive.
It's on your flash drive, and we'll read the courses that are contained within that as applicable to the engineering degree programs that we offer at our institutions. Okay, the 4-year side then is going to dig up from the respective departments the parallel courses for that and be ready to discuss any differences that are there. Okay, item number 2.
Which courses are there? Everything on this list?
The ones that are in your curriculum that are on that list.
The FOS 02?
Just look at the FOS. Well, look at anything that's on here that is in the engineering field. Now, John, hang on 1 second. I think we're going to answer your question. Roderick, hang on 1 second.
You were mentioning that there's a course missing, an engineering course that's missing.
Okay, hang on a second. Okay, so we're going to do that for the courses we teach. Okay, action item number 2. So that was action item number 1A and 1B. Action item number 2 for our next meeting is, in your individual mind, in consultation with the faculty at your institution, for the broad engineering picture, and again, we're only 24 institutions that are representing over 100 institutions within the state. So we've got to take our institutional hat off a little bit and put on our statewide, let's develop engineers hat. So as individuals in consultation with the faculty that our institutions, looking at the broad education of an engineer, what are the math courses that should be contained within the field of study? And I think we see some differences coming out here. What are the math courses that should be contained within the field of study? What are the science courses, chemistry and physics, that should be contained within the field of study? And 2C is what are the engineering, lower division engineering courses that should be contained within the field of study. Any of these 3 categories can be blank. I mean, there may not be statics contained within the field of study or dynamics. There may not be differential equations. There may be no sciences at all that are contained within the field of study, which wouldn't make sense because we still got that 6-hour science requirement for the core curriculum. But any of these things that we come back together can be blank. And then action item 3, and this is preparatory work. want to get through these other issues first, but in preparatory work, bring in your institution's introduction to engineering course or courses, because that is, I mean, it's sitting here. We're going to need to get into that discussion at some point, so bring those together. In our next meeting, we're probably not going to get to that point, but have it ready. So let's pull the information together, because then I think with this information in hand, we can begin moving forward.
Can I add, besides the math, science, and engineering, we have any other core that we want to do there?
Okay, good point. Let's add that as
technical communication, something like that.
Yes, let's add that as action item 4. I meant that and I completely forgot it. Action item 4 is any of the other courses that could count as the 42-hour core that should be included in there to properly prepare the engineer without driving an institution's curriculum. Because, I mean, I agree with you, we should have technical writing, but not all the institutions have technical writing. So we don't want to constrain, but if the technical writing course could be used as English 1302, then it's probably okay. But let's just look at those issues. If we could do that, now can we agree to that? Let's walk out here with some kind of agreement today. Okay, April agrees. If April agrees, we're in good shape. Okay, can we agree to those 4 action items coming together for the next meeting we're ready to discuss?
So, look, I think I think the idea is good here, but there needs to be a standard format here in terms of what's happening across all of the institutions. There's how we're going to look at the math, science, lower division, engineering courses. What is the information that what is the information that you want? What are the questions that we need to be asking, and how do we bring those responses back so that everybody brings back consistent information?
Let's not worry about format at this point, because we're still in a discussion on how we present this. We'll get into the formatting later. I mean, what the charge is here for these action items is look at the academic course guide manual for the courses that we're talking about. Okay, so that's there. Just look at that.
And when you say look, what is that?
Read it.
What do you expect?
Understand what's there. Then look at your institution's courses. Now, this was more the 4-year than the 2-year because of the applicability. Then look at your institution's courses for that. And let's see where that content comes in. Again, just bring those syllabi in. Let's not worry about the format and how it's presented. Be ready to discuss these differences coming to the next meeting, going through those, the math area and the sciences area, with sciences being the chemistry and the physics. Then the introduction to engineering, again, bring in what is there at this point. And in item 4, it's the core curriculum type courses that should be contained, if any, within the field of study. And if we can just do that, we wouldn't worry about the format at this point. We want to be ready to have this information available so we all come educated as to what it is. And in looking at those pieces, again, we all get paid by an institution. My check is very blue and orange. But we got to be looking at the statewide picture also. Okay. Dan, one question.
I have a very, very small question. How do we tackle the courses that are borderline? Some colleges and ACGM has the course like strength of materials or mechanical materials and engineering economics at the level 2, sophomore. And some universities have it at the 3, junior level. So how do we mitigate that? That is something that I am confused how I can implement it.
Let's not get ahead. Let's hold that for a future discussion point, because if nobody believes that course should be part of the field of study, the issue goes away. So let's see what the content should be first, and then let's look at how we can resolve some of these other differences that roll in. I just want to break this thing into pieces so we can get this elephant consumed. And right now there's a huge elephant sitting in the room that we've got to eat one small bite at a time.
That was just one. That was specifically the course I was mentioning. 2308 is not on this list as we were talking about all the courses.
2308 is
engineering economy.
Which?
Engineering economy. Engineering economy.
I don't. Was that in any of the field of study requirements?
It was in that change.
Industrial.
Yeah, it was in industrial. And that was one of the changes that came into as a prerequisite that course by one of the troublemakers in the room.
Okay.
But it's not on this. It's just not on this list.
To help
But it's in the ACG.
It should be in there.
To help the 4-year folks or whatever, I see some trepidation of a lot of work. This right here could not have been done on the original, on the one ACGM we're working on now. It has to have been done back in.
Yeah, this is all that's been.
The FOSS 2002.
Yeah, this list right here, it is basically, it shows you the courses that are required, or the field of study, the 6, and then the S. So, in answer to Terry's question, if you're trying to figure out which courses that you're thinking about potentially, if there's a course that's got an X right across all 8, then I would definitely recommend that you consider bringing in
something entirely different. What I'm saying is, this is the 2015 ACGM. There's some stuff that's not even included that's now in the ACGM.
Those courses are the only ones that are, if you were to, the way that we created that list is we took the engineering field of study and we just made X's where the courses were, and then of course the original field of study had lots of caveats. So that's where all of those little footnotes are. Frankly, all we ended up doing, we took these and we made along the x-axis, we made a list of all the courses, and we may have missed one. So, and then across the top, we put all of the original field of study, the 6 transfer compacts, and the ACES degree. And then if that course was in that, then we put a little X there. And apparently we missed one with the, but that document there was to really help the committee see across the board rather than trying to figure out, because frankly what would have happened in this committee, I think, is that a subcommittee would have been formed to do essentially the work that coordinating board staff did, to just let you know what courses are in these compacts or in the, and it was just done within the last week.
And just for everybody too, is what part of Dan's question. Okay, this FOS 2002 category is what's currently contained in the field of study. What is under the engineering transfer compacts, the courses that were included in the Appendix A of each of the voluntary articulation compacts. This last is the statewide Associate of Science and Engineering Science degree. But really, for what we're looking at now is just the engineering transfer compact pieces are the ones that should be looked at big time. And then if we've got programs of study that are not included within that, then let's take a look at where those courses apply to. And again, it's the lower division side. What some are offering is lower division. Now, some of them have the same course as lower division or upper division. Let's get that into the mix. But looking at structural design for the civils is not a lower division course anywhere. So we're not talking about those kind of things. It's what's that lower division, what the students are coming in as transfer, bearing in mind that the transfers are almost always occurring somewhere in the first 2 years. And if a student comes in transferring in after the 3rd year, that's a whole different can of worms. We just can't address that because we're too deep into a curriculum and program fabric and everything. But we're really looking at a student coming in after the first 2 years, a student who's taken some of the courses, where can it fall in? And again, what we're trying to do, our guiding principle here is the transferability of the course and the completion of the degree. So, and we need to be able, and I mean, Roderick brought up with his advisors, I'm hearing it constantly from our advisors. We have got, the students need to be told something to take and advised so they're going to be put onto a pathway. And again, it goes back to the conventional urban wisdom that's floating around, which I think we all disagree with. Go to the community college, get all your core curriculum courses out of the way, then come to the university and study engineering, and they've got 4 years ahead of them because of prerequisites. And on top of that, we have totally abused the student in doing that because by far and large, without wasting credit hours, they're not going to be a full-time student, therefore they're not going to be eligible for financial aid in many instances. So we've got to get this thing structured in a coherent manner that a student can move, is getting prerequisite courses, and is going to be able to maintain full-time student status as they go through and do it. So, I mean, there is the advising issue that rolls into this whole mess, too. But with that, Victor, Mary, then Victor.
If you will, then, I can see that we missed it. So on your grid, if you could just write down engineering economics, 2308, we will fix that. And the program that does have that as part of the suggested courses is industrial engineering, and that's the only one. And so if you could, I'll make sure, I hope I'm right. I don't see it anywhere else. But anyway, if you could just update that, and then we'll fix it.
And then help Mary, too. I mean, everything that she's talking about is contained on your jump drive. Take a quick look at it. If you see something else that's missing, just drop a note to Mary or to Mindy, and they'll get it out to everybody else. So.
Same with your title or your contact information, anything in there, and then we'll make sure that we fix it for the next meeting.
Mary, add double E to your list.
Double E. Got it.
Okay.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Okay. With that, can we agree to those action items for the next meeting? Okay, the final thing that we want to get concluded, and then we will convene here at 2 o'clock, is our next face-to-face meeting. Given what we have to do, given final exam schedules, some end of the semester activities and things that are beginning to roll in, my suggestion is we have this meeting early-ish in April, and Mary and Mindy can send out the monkey polls. We can agree on a gross time frame, or we do it the latter part of May, because we're getting into finals and a bunch of things coming in.
Yeah.
Oh, fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can definitely put it on Friday. We'll give you some Friday dates.
But let's do it.
Tuesday, Thursday dates too, because typically Monday, Wednesday, Friday is heavy, and we did a Wednesday already.
With that, let's just do the survey monkey poll, whatever it is you use. Let's see where we can get the most people that can meet, recognizing we got 28 people in the room with totally divergent schedules, and that becomes a systems engineering problem, which we're not addressing here.
I like homework. So I was wondering if you could give us like a template of the kind of data that you would like. So rather than me going and thinking, well, I think what he wants is this, and could you like send us like here? I mean, if you wanted, some kind of guidelines like a form or a do this or do that, or would you like us to send you stuff in advance of the first meeting?
You're getting way too deep. You're getting way too deep. And all we want to do, okay, here's what. Okay, all we want you to do at this point is be ready to discuss. Okay, we're going to put templatized things as we go forward and come to agreement. We want you to come to the next meeting being ready to discuss the courses that we talked about that should be included within the field of study from a position of strength. You have educated yourselves on the field, on the academic course guide manual. If it's not there, you've compared this to your institution's courses. From this, you're bringing forward an idea of what should be contained within it. So there's no formats or anything. All we want to do is get a listing of courses for this first pass that we can come out of the next meeting. So we're not going to exchange information and try and compare everything. We want to be ready to discuss this from a position of knowledge regarding where we're coming from. And I think there's been enough difference in that, don't go any deeper than that. Yeah.
I have to discuss this with our faculty.
Discuss with the faculty. Yeah, just do any and all the discussions. But this group comes into the next meeting ready to discuss within this body all that information, the collective wisdom that we've gathered.
And I think what you're looking for is you're looking for lowest common denominators. You're not necessarily looking to make this a perfect document in a specific field. I think if you look at how the field study was originally conceived of, and you look at the small numbers of courses that we can include, et cetera, you're really looking for lowest common denominator events.
But I think the problem is that this paragraph B here, whatever we decide on here, is going to set everyone's lower division program. So, for example, if we decide not to include Calculus 3, students will be able to transfer into a 4-year school without having taken Calculus 3.
Yes, and they'll be required to take it at that institution then, if it's a part of that institution's curriculum.
No, it doesn't say that there. It just says C.
Paragraph C.
But it says here, if a student successfully, in B, if a student successfully completes a field of study curriculum, then the receiving institution must accept that for their lower division requirements. So
For that curriculum.
If you're a 4-year institution, if I understand it, if you're a 4-year institution who has Calculus 3 in your lower division program, you must accept.
No. You can still require, if the student completes the field of study courses, that field of study curriculum is accepted, but it becomes the transfer for those courses. If your curriculum has got Calculus 3, then the student will still be required to take Calculus 3. That's not being superseded.
It's a caveat of what
it says here, if a student successfully completes a field of study curriculum developed by this board. So let's just, for example, say that we come up with a field of study that does not include Calculus 3. And then that means that the next line says that we must accept it. The four-year institution must accept that for our lower division requirements. And then if the four-year institution has Calculus 3 as a lower division requirement, the student, we must accept their field of study to include that requirement.
No, I don't think it's interpreted that way.
The last line of paragraph C. The last line of paragraph C. That's the last line of paragraph C. Takes care of that.
Following.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's Forrest. I know what you're saying. There's not an institution in this room that's going to fall into that.
But I think the reality of it is these are the questions we need to surface, and we need to rewrite that. I don't think there's any. We have to put footnotes and caveats into whatever we put forward.
Is this a proposal then, right now, or is this actually the? Okay, so whatever we come up with.
Yeah, but I think the out that we got, or to complete additional requirements of the receiving institution's programs, as long as those requirements do not duplicate course content already completed. So Calculus 3 would be the additional requirement of an institution. So it's the last partial line, second last full line in that word.
Without completing. On the second line, it says a student who transfers to another without completing the field of study curriculum. So if they did complete the field of study, that C doesn't refer to them.
Well,
you see what I'm getting at, that they can come in. So if we have to be very careful about, because we are going to define every four-year institution's lower division requirements.
Okay, let's put this to an end here. Very
right.
Let's get a ruling.
I will take it to our general counsel, and on the next meeting we will be prepared to discuss it. I will tell you there's another rule that in the core curriculum area that says kind of like that line that's in C that addresses this issue. So I think I agree with Jim, but I'll go to our general counsel and get a definitive ruling for you.
One thing I think I can say for all institutions that are sitting in this room, the 4-year for certain, is if we are constrained by that, I don't think any of us can accept the field of study curriculum, and the bottom line is there will be no courses contained within the field of study, because that totally hamstrings what it is we can do with our curricula, and more importantly, and this we need to be careful in talking about these courses too, more importantly is the ABET criteria, and under ABET's general criteria of the Engineering Accreditation Commission, it says calculus up through differential equations. I mean, that's an explicit requirement contained within ABET. Now, nothing we discussed here violates that, it's how it's contained. But that's there, so if that's enforced, the state of Texas will lose its ABET accreditation because it doesn't satisfy that requirement. So,
because you could just make them take it as an upper division course. I think the point that Forrest is making.
I think the point he's making is that if we say lower division and someone's catalog says this is the lower division math requirements for engineering and this field of study is it, then they come in, they've met that criteria. That's the way I'm interpreting it.
Let's not get wrapped around the axle on this issue. I truly believe, having been before the legislature and the coordinating board, I think we're over-interpreting a rule, and in some ways I think we're becoming conspiracy theorists. Let's take it at face value at this point that we're not going to be forced to do that. Gary will check into that, but that is something, I mean, we got a whole different discussion if that's what we're being forced to do. And even John, I agree we can do it, but now we're changing curriculum up because the student transfers, so we got another curriculum coming in. I mean, that is a whole can of worms that if we get into that, we're toast.
Yeah, no, my point was that I don't know that we need to be looking at the lowest common denominator. Perhaps we should be looking at the highest common.
No, let's look at. No, let's back off. Let's go to our guiding principles. Okay, let's go to our guiding principles, and then let's agree not to discuss it anymore today because we're getting tired. Okay, our guiding principles. We want to flexibility for the student to achieve success. We want minimization of lost credit hours, and we want the four-year to be able to maintain their fabric. But anything that we do that violates those guiding principles, we shouldn't be doing. Let's not dig too deep and try and interpret something too strictly until we get the true legal interpretation. And it could be just an unfortunate set of words that are being interpreted differently than were not intended. But with that, I think we've got our homework assignment. We're going to do the Survey Monkey, whatever is used. Mindy and Mary will take care of that. And we're looking at dates in the early-ish April for our next get-together here in Austin.
Do I understand that you want Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday
Let's
days?
go across the board because we've all got varying schedules.
Okay, across the board it is then.
Okay, now, may I ask one other question? This is to the coordinating board. With all the campuses that we've got represented, must we meet in Austin, or could we perhaps meet on some of the different campuses and see what's going on there through part of this process?
Do anything you want.
Okay.
Reservation is casting committees.
Oh, that's true. Right.
Because,
Yeah.
as discussed earlier, y'all 24 represent a small snippet of the institutions.
We're webcasting this, and hopefully others are listening, monitoring, following, because as discussed, y'all are making decisions for the state. And so that would be my only reservation there, if you can get past that technology issue.
If your institution can webcast a meeting and would be interested in hosting one of these meetings as we go through this process, why don't you just drop the four of us a note and we'll see what can be done. Austin seems to be centrally located and it's perhaps the easiest, but if we want to go up to Dallas for one of the meetings, and it can be done, not today. We'll stay out of Dallas today. If we want to go to College Station, Terry, but just Arlington's not too far, but seriously, and if you got the ability to webcast and you would like to give us a chance to see each other's campuses, through this process, just advise. But in the interim, we'll just plan on meeting here in Austin. Okay, with that, I guess Dan moves that we adjourn because he already stood up and started to walk.
Second.
Roderick seconds that motion. Is anybody foolish enough to oppose it? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.